Surely Sam Darnold seeing ghosts again in the playoffs against a team that the Seahawks has to play twice a year inside the stadium of another team that the Seahawks have to play twice a year is nothing to worry about. Yeah, everything will be just fine. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 22 team in my power rankings heading into the 2025 NFL season, as today we take a deep dive into the Seattle Seahawks, a team that I think a lot of people have every reason to be excited about, but a team with Mike Macdonald heading into year two, assisted by their new quarterback, Sam Darnold, coming after his breakout year in Minnesota last year. This is a team that does have a lot to prove and a lot to talk about here today before this team can get to where they want to go. But before we do get started, if you could do me a huge, quick little favor and hit that like button down below, it really does help. It pushes this video out to other Seahawks fans and NFL sickos just like you. I really appreciate it. And make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of our remaining deep dives as we lead up to the number one team in my power rankings. But without further ado, let's get started taking a look at this Seahawks offseason that was very busy and one of the more interesting offseasons that any team had in terms of player movement. So let's get into it. Starting with the coaching staff, though, they did make a change at offensive coordinator. Ryan Grubb did not meet their standards last year, and they go and get Clint Kubiak from New Orleans, a very good pickup, in my opinion, as far as offensive coordinators hanging out there on the streets are concerned. Did some really good stuff in New Orleans last year with not a ton to work with, so I actually do consider this an upgrade. Love to see that. But then with the roster, they make the big change at quarterback, saying goodbye to Geno Smith after what felt honestly like a short-lived breakout here in Seattle. They decide they don't want to give him the contract extension and go with kind of a younger version of him in Sam Darnold in free agency, though I don't consider Sam Darnold quite at the level that I feel Geno had played in Seattle. I understand that because of the age gap, they view this as a lateral move, and I can understand how they sold it to themselves internally, but I do ultimately think it is a slight downgrade in terms of proven quarterback play in this building. But they do also bring in some other pieces here. Jalen Milroe, in particular, in the third round of the draft, a very interesting traits-based developmental prospect there that Seahawks fans are excited for the potential of his future here in Seattle. And then welcome back Drew Lock, who just might be their QB2 this season. But again, I do consider that quarterback room at least slightly downgraded from what they've gotten from Geno Smith over the last couple of years, if not for the actual level of quarterback play that Geno has given them, but at least in terms of floor and kind of knowing what you're getting with Sam Darnold. Still, honestly, a bit of a question mark coming off of just a one-year wonder type of season in Kevin O'Connell's offense. But then at running back, really no change other than finding Damian Martinez in the 7th round of the draft. He falls for some potential off-field stuff, but a great talent to get that late in the draft, so enough for me to say slightly upgraded, even if it is just a 7th round pick there. And then at tight end, this one might ruffle the feathers of some Seahawks fans here, but I did say just slightly upgraded, even though they spend that 2nd round pick on Elijah Arroyo. We will have to have some conversations about what he's going to mean for this team in this season and beyond. But needless to say, I was a good bit lower on where the Seahawks ended up drafting him there in the top 50 of the draft. It is still, again, a slight upgrade to this room, as their only loss is going to be Pharaoh Brown, but not quite enough for me to say fully upgraded, just slightly upgraded, in my opinion, and the tight end room. But then at wide receiver, they go ahead and ship off DK Metcalf to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Quite possibly the best player on this Seahawks team, if not the most difference-making player in terms of what his traits brought to the table. For this offense, it's not that they didn't do anything to replace him in that wide receiver room, but Cooper Kupp does not bring nearly the dynamism that he does. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is the same idea, but not a quarter of the player that DK Metcalf is as that vertical threat. And then a pair of mid to late day 3 rookies in Torrey Horton and Ricky White. below losing DK Metcalf, they also let Tyler Lockett go. That's not nearly as much of a loss given what he was at this stage in his career, but did still play over 2/3 of their snaps in that wide receiver room last year. So while they're not in panic mode with this wide receiver room, with those additions, I do still consider it downgraded, not just because of the caliber of player that DK Metcalf is, but maybe even more so because of how his presence forces defenses to defend the Seattle Seahawks and this passing game. But then on the offensive line, the Seahawks finally break the mold and spend a first-round pick on an interior offensive lineman. Feels like years and years of making mock drafts. We've been begging John Schneider in this front office to do it, and they finally do. And with that, I think there is very reasonable optimism that you are going to see some upgrades along the interior of that offensive line. Gray Zabel, a very good, very fun first-round pick for them. But it's not a guarantee. They do lose Laken Tomlinson, who certainly didn't play great for them last year, but did play damn near every single snap. All but, I think, 2 snaps available were played by Laken Tomlinson at left guard there. And then maybe even more significantly, the half of the season that they did get from Connor Williams last year before he retired mid-season. So, I'm not going to say it's big shoes to fill for Gray Zabel. I think you can be optimistic that it will be hopefully upgraded, but not a guarantee. Those are really the core moves on the offensive line. The rest of it, Stone Forsythe, their backup tackle, no longer with the team, listed under the losses for the Seahawks, actually coded in green because his loss is addition by subtraction. I think Seahawks fans would agree with that. They did bring in some better tackle depth in Josh Jones, who at this point in his career has shown that he can really only play left tackle, which is fascinating, but a nice enough pickup nonetheless. And then a pair of late day 3 prospects in Cable Dew and Mason Richmond. So really the Gray Zabel addition alone, they are hoping can be an upgrade from the sort of player and a half of veterans that they're losing there in Laken Tomlinson and Connor Williams. But then you look at the defensive side of things, and it's quite clear, looking at the graphic here, that they were much more focused on shaking things up on offense and going a little bit more status quo on defense. Not that there's no changes here, but pretty minor. So on the interior of the defensive line, I said this group is neutral. Just Roy Robertson Harris, who they brought in midseason, only played 17% of their snaps. He is no longer with the team, and they kind of replaced that sort of tweener hybrid athlete body as depth on that D-line with Riley Mills out of Notre Dame in the 5th round. So saying neutral again with the interior of the defensive line. And then on the edge, they lose Draymond Jones, who played about half their snaps as an edge player for them last year. And they bring in the 33-year-old DeMarcus Lawrence coming off a season-ending foot injury for the Cowboys. They gave him a lot of money for a guy at his age coming off a significant foot injury, but he has played well when he's been on the field for Dallas. And, Draymond Jones was okay for them. I think DeMarcus Lawrence can be pretty good now getting into that edge rotation and is enough to at least say slightly upgraded with that edge room. Then at linebacker, I did keep this as neutral, but it is at least worth putting up there. All of the different changes that they went through at this linebacker position last year, now they at least kind of know who they're going with this year. They kind of cycled through Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker. They traded Baker for Ernest Jones and then released Tyrell Dodson. So this time around, they will get a full season of Ernest Jones. That is certainly a good thing for this Seahawks team. He did end up playing 60% of their snaps. It wasn't quite enough for me to say that alone makes this group upgraded, but you could certainly make an argument for it. But yeah, again, just wanted to list those sort of changes on the linebacker room because it was fascinating to follow them trying to find their answers in this linebacker room last year. But then at cornerback, I said neutral. You could make an argument for ever so slightly upgraded in terms of depth. They lose Trey Brown, who struggled for them. You could argue that's actually addition by subtraction with how he played last year. And then Shaq Griffin coming back to Seattle after kind of a journey around the entire country, going to Jacksonville, Houston, Minnesota, but back here in Seattle, listed as depth currently, but very good depth by NFL standards. So it wasn't enough for me to really note this as an upgraded room. but it is at least a pickup worth a shout out there with Shaq Griffin. Then at safety, definitely they are hoping will be upgraded, to be determined in many ways. Nick Emanwari is a very raw safety coming out. They are saying goodbye to Rayshawn Jenkins, who played half of their snaps in that safety 3, that big body safety role that Nick Emanwari will be cleanly stepping into. Reason to believe Nick Emanwari can outplay what they got from Jenkins, but certainly no guarantee. And then special teams staying neutral for me. Really, the only change there is a shift in return men, where it was primarily Jalen Darden for them last year, among some other guys that got some looks. Steven Sims is going to fill into those shoes, and they'll probably have another kind of rotation of guys returning kicks again this year. But there is your Seahawks offseason that was, in my opinion, a very polarizing offseason in a bunch of different spots by John Schneider and this Seahawks regime, really kind of rocking the boat, I think, creating some upside, but also some uncertainty, especially with the offense. Like, you go from Geno to Sam Darnold, you trade away DK Metcalf, you bring in a 32-year-old Cooper Kupp that's had a hard time staying healthy in recent years. Like, you got to kind of come out and prove that your vision for this offense is going to be right when you make moves like that. And then, one of your big signings being a 33-year-old DeMarcus Lawrence in what is already a deep edge group for you, with him coming off a season-ending foot injury. It's like, is that really the piece that your defense needed to take that next step? In the draft, you go and get this kind of super raw, hyper athlete with essentially a first round pick there, Nick Emanwari. Just a very polarizing offseason. I just want to say that. I don't necessarily hate it, but there's some aspects that I think you can question, and as we go through the roster, you'll kind of pick up on some of the pieces that I might have some questions about certain moves that they did make. But before we get into the roster segment, let's talk about this coaching staff for the Seahawks. And from this perspective, I do think the Seahawks are in very good hands and heading in the right direction. Mike Macdonald is someone heading into year 2 here for the Seahawks team that we've already talked about several times in this deep dive series, because damn near 1/4 of the league is trying to replicate his system and his defense around the league with Miami and Tennessee. We've already detailed Mike Macdonald's defense that he is obviously running here in Seattle. But anytime a quarter of the league is trying to replicate what you're doing, you're obviously doing something right, specifically from an X's and O's perspective. And we'll get a little bit further into the scheme there, but I do have a lot of respect, rightfully so, for what Mike Macdonald can do to elevate this defense. We already saw the beginnings of it last year, stepping right in for a Seahawks defense that, really since the drop-off of the Legion of Boom, whatever year that might have been, like 2018, there was about a 5-year stretch where this Seahawks team was like playing into a hurricane against their own defense that was seemingly any given week at risk of giving up 30 points and losing because of their defense. It just was so far removed from those Pete Carroll-led Legion of Boom defenses that we got to know and love. Mike Macdonald steps in, and just like any premium defensive mind, it's going to take a little bit of time to find your guys and sort through, like he did, the linebacker room and the CB2 spot, and coach this scheme to the players. But by season's end, things really were settling down. I would not describe the Seahawks as an elite defense by season's end. I think that is the next step for Mike Macdonald here to really enter that ranking of premium coaches that we discuss. But definitely got this team to the point that they ended the year right about 11th in defensive DVOA. They were really a good defense down the stretch. They won some games like that Bears game. It was like a night game. They won what was it, like 9-3 or whatever it was. They won some very impressive games with their defense alone. Some hiccup games in there as well. That again held them back from being like an elite defense. But yes, I do think Mike Macdonald did about as much as you could have expected for him in year 1. And then now as we head into year 2, it's like, can he really take that maybe final step and get this to be a feared premium defense in this league? And that's going to be probably the best path for this Seahawks team to exceed this 22nd overall team ranking and be a playoff team and make some noise this season is really what year 2 of Mike Macdonald's defense can look here. So I have him as the 16th overall head coach, very respectable for a year 2 coach that has yet to make the playoffs as a head coach. So maybe a vote of confidence in his talents, even with that 16th ranking there. But as far as the defensive coaching rankings for the Seahawks go, they are already very, very high. 3rd to 6th in the league for pass defense coaching and 4th to 9th for run defense coaching with A- grades there. So already viewing the Seahawks here as one of the best defensive coached teams in the league, with even some potential to be the best or top 3 in that regard. Now, before we talk about the offensive coaching here and the addition of Clint Kubiak, first off, I want to talk about Aiden Durd for a second because I do like him. And then I do want to profile the Mike Macdonald defense schematically speaking as well, something we've already done in a couple of these deep dives with other teams. But Aiden Durd is very fascinating to me. He comes from England, and he coached under Dan Quinn in the sort of Seattle 3 branch of defensive coaching. But then when he got to Dallas with Dan Quinn, going with him from Atlanta, Dan Quinn totally changed his defense to basically an attacking cover 1 oriented defense that really had a heavy focus on twists and games up front, the way they schemed up Micah Parsons as well, moving defensive linemen around, creating matchup problems. They did some really creative stuff with Dan Quinn in Dallas. And then Durd comes with Mike Macdonald to kind of learn this Macdonald Ravens new wave defensive scheme that obviously so many teams around the league are looking to replicate. And the guy that has a background of doing other stuff that has now learned this system from Mike Macdonald that is very respected around the league. If things go well here with this defense in Seattle, this is a guy that as early as next offseason, I would bet on being in those head coach interviews and head coach candidates lists that you see out there. So definitely pulling for him. I don't think we've had a Brit as a head coach in the NFL. That would certainly be, good for so many different aspects, but for the international branding outlook of the NFL, to get to hear the accent at the podium every week, just for his own sake, it would be really exciting. So I'm definitely pulling for Aiden Durd, and I do think he has done a good job at his various stops and is a good asset for this Seahawks team to have. And I like, even if Mike Macdonald has his scheme that is so highly renowned, it's great to have someone that has a different sort of coaching influence in there to have just different change-ups to bring to different game plans if you need it. So big fan of that. Definitely worth spending some time on Aiden Durd. But we do have to touch back up on the scheme here under Mike Macdonald. Like I said, we've discussed this with the Titans and Dolphins deep dives already. To avoid being overly redundant with the way I broke that scheme down, I came up with kind of some bullet points that stand out about the Mike Macdonald defense, what they do, what they focus on, and maybe what's a little more unique about what they do. The first bullet point is to understand this defense from a coverage perspective. It is very much in line with your Vic Fangio style defenses, or even with Mike Macdonald maybe having a little more of a college influence, having spent a year at Michigan, even some of that kind of Sabanese style defense, which is a lot of the split safety, quarters heavy concepts, your top down zone match style systems that love to play pre-snap, too high looks, and then rotate into any variety of coverages to try to cause confusion for the quarterback. So a lot of those influences there, Fangio, Sabanese style coverages, but Mike Macdonald and this system doesn't do it like so many of the Vic Fangio disciples that ended up getting fired did. Guys like Brandon Staley and Joe Barry, Ed Donatel, where they felt like, yeah, we can just play pre-snap, quarters, off zone, call it a day. Offenses just picked them apart, ran the ball at them, threw underneath passes, and they never adjusted. Well, Mike Macdonald and the coaches in his tree will play quarters, but yeah, they might press one of those outside corners and have a little bit more confidence in that corner to not get beat over the top. Because if you do play press out of quarters, it is kind of leaving them on an island in many ways. You're not going to have that safety help over the top because those middle safeties are typically going to be lurking towards your number 2 wide receiver, counting outside in. So you can leave those corners on an island a little bit more, but showing the confidence that you can do that and play a little bit more press coverage in the right opportunities. And even just instead of running 10 yards off from quarters, how about 5 yards off and split that difference a little bit more? So it's just slightly more aggressive in the way that they call these coverages than some of these failed Fangio systems around the league. And by the way, Vic Fangio understands that. It's just his disciples that have struggled in that sense. But another thing that stands out, I think, as it relates to the secondary too, is that they discovered in Baltimore the value of using 3 safety packages, taking that nickel corner that's often 185, 190 pounds, dropping in kind of a versatile big nickel safety into that spot who can cover from the slot, maybe not quite as good as a undersized slot corner, but a lot of these split safety 2-shell defenses where they struggle a lot is lighter boxes. Without that extra safety down in the box, teams can run all over you. We've seen the ascension of, the highest yards per carry in the last 2 seasons that we've seen in a long, long time in the NFL because these Fangio-style defenses become so prominent. Well, you add a little bit more size, a little more physicality into that nickel corner position, like a Kyle Hamilton, like the Seahawks are trying to replicate here with a Nicky Manwari. The Titans, the same idea in this system. They go and get a Kevin Winston Jr., big-bodied safety out of Penn State to run 3 safety packages. We saw the Chargers with Jesse Minter. Same deal with Derwin James playing that big nickel star, apex defender. That's a big staple of these defenses. Obviously something they're hoping to do even more this year with Nicky Manwari, I think. They did it last year, though, running a lot of 3 safety packages with Rayshawn Jenkins in here. So that's another area that they're able to kind of compensate for the weaknesses of a true Fangio system in many ways. And again, Vic Fangio understands that. It's not a shot at him. He went and got Cooper DeJean and plugged him into that role, who's a 210-pound slot corner, do-it-all nickel corner. So this is not a shot at Vic Fangio. It's just what the league thought a Vic Fangio defense was, I think, that has failed. But those are core identities of these Mike Macdonald defenses. And then you talk more about the fronts and what they do with their front 6, front 7. It's very unique, very kind of revolutionary, such a multiple front. Not, any given week you will see the Seahawks and coaches in this system. They will come out in any variety of different looks, whether it's early down defending the run or later downs with their blitz packages. And what they do is they coach everybody up front, every different alignment for all of their different fronts. And that sounds impossible, but instead of calling their plays really by individual plays within formation, they'll tell you where you're lining up, and then they'll tell you what the play is. So they have less plays to really understand here, but it allows them to stay super multiple, pick matchups, confuse offenses, scheme up phantom pressure off of blitzes, run stunts. Like their blitz designs, Mike Macdonald especially, his blitz designs are brilliant and really have thrown offenses for a loop because they look different every week. You don't know the tendencies and what's coming. So a very multiple front. There are a lot of those 3-4 principles, though. So the idea of being able to drop an edge rusher into coverage off of those blitzes, that's a big part of what they want to do as well. Or even here, dropping Leonard Williams into a hook zone and picking off Aaron Rodgers. Like anybody could be dropping at any given moment. So the multiplicity of the front is a huge asset. And then also the overall aggressiveness, not necessarily blitzing a ton. Both the Ravens and the Seahawks kind of over the last 2 years have been just slightly below average in blitz rate, right there around 20th or so. But it's really the efficiency of when they do blitz and not being afraid to really dial things up, and then keying into that third point there of the multiplicity. So moving guys around, loading up the front, creating them a lot of that phantom pressure where guys are sliding in the wrong direction, you get free rushers. Oftentimes it is that aggressive mentality, knowing that, okay, yeah, this team is not afraid to send the heat and really get after us, but because teams know that's coming, it can turn into, whoops, they actually just sent 4 players, which isn't technically going to get charted as a blitz, but you do get a free rusher and quick pressure as well, with all of that multiplicity and creativity pairing with an overall aggressive nature of this beautiful system. Those to me are probably the 4 standout points of a Mike Macdonald system that you should be familiar with, because this is not the first wave of Mike Macdonald hires that I think will permeate throughout the league, because really all of these defenses had success. Chargers blew everybody away. They were close to top 10 in defense with abysmal roster talent, frankly. Seahawks sniffed the top 10. The Titans and Dolphins with pretty poor talent were right around the 2020 spot. The Ravens, after losing all these coaches, took some time to figure everything back out. They had some communications and personnel issues early, but they settled back in with this system as well, and really were rocking by season's end. So it's a good system. It's kind of proven at this point, and it's just the beginning, I think, of this new wave Macdonald Ravens scheme. But we can now flip over to the offensive side of things with Clint Kubiak coming in, the son of Gary Kubiak, who's kind of the original. So if Mike Shanahan is the original Batman of the Shanahan system, Gary Kubiak would be the Robin to Mike Shanahan. And then Clint Kubiak, I'm not going to call him the Robin of the Shanahan system. That's probably Sean McVay if Robin gained superpowers. We're really going off the rails here, but Clint Kubiak himself, the son of Gary Kubiak, absolutely comes from that Shanahan-inspired coaching system and very much runs a Kyle Shanahan-oriented offense, which is, as we've discussed in almost every deep dive, because 2 out of 3 teams in the league run some form of a Shanahan-styled offense, is going to be your wide zone-based running game. Clint Kubiak, as he showed in New Orleans, loves heavy personnel, just like Kyle Shanahan. So a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends. The way they used Taysom Hill was very fascinating. It's kind of that wing H-back type. But yeah, that base of the wide zone run game and your play action concepts off of that, where you want to marry the run and the pass, make everything kind of look the same, cause confusion for linebackers where they can't be over aggressive against the run because play action could kill them at any moment in time, and get your defensive linemen moving east and west instead of north and south as pass rushers off of play action. That's the core reason why you see these Shanahan-inspired offenses able to protect their offensive line so much more, is because of the heavy use of play action. So that's going to be the offense here. And frankly, the Seahawks have kind of been in this world for a while now. Shane Waldron, especially when he was here, came from the Sean McVay offense, and Seahawks fans are not unfamiliar with that kind of wide zone play action heavy attack. But they did bring in Ryan Grubb last year, and I think he struggled to balance that kind of being the existing infrastructure of the offense, something Geno, I think, was really comfortable with as well. Struggling to balance, still utilizing a lot of those Shanahan-inspired concepts on top of coming from a very kind of college spread, vertical attacking passing game that he had with that great Washington offense. It just wasn't the right blend. But Clint Kubiak is a full diversion back to the Shanahan-inspired offense here. And I think that's overall a good thing for the Seahawks here. And I think for Clint, he absolutely is another one of these potential head coach candidate types. I thought it was even possible that the Saints might have considered just making him the head coach, depending on what types of candidates were interested in that job. They were ultimately able to get Kellen Moore a little bit to my surprise. But if Clint's successful here in Seattle, he's also going to be a risk for the Seahawks to lose as a head coach candidate. He was the offensive coordinator back in Minnesota when he was very young. He was about 34 years old, I believe, when Gary retired, and they made Clint the coordinator. There might have been a Stefanski year in between there as well, but just wasn't quite ready. The team wasn't quite where they are now with their offensive infrastructure, and he did struggle in Minnesota, but he goes right back to Kyle, kind of learns a few new things, and then lands back on his feet as the coordinator for the Saints. and did a phenomenal job last year, especially in the first couple of weeks when the Saints were off to historic paces in the first couple of weeks, and then injuries really racked up with the offensive line, with Derek Carr, with Chris Olave, and it just became too much for Clint Kubiak to overcome. But the offense still managed to... saying the offense functioned almost feels like a compliment, but obviously when your entire team falls apart, it's very difficult. But at no point did it feel like Clint lost the idea of what they wanted to do, and still I think got the most every single week of what he could with that offense. And a lot of his ability to kind of scheme guys open on these deep vertical shots early in the season with Rashid Shaheed, and then when Shaheed gets hurt, it was Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Really showed that he not just conceptually knows how to scheme things up, how to kind of predict what coverages he's going to get, but knowing exactly when to push those buttons, finding that right balance of run and play action pass. So you're very encouraged with Clint Kubiak coming in, and he kind of ranks right around the middle of the league for me as an offensive play caller. 14th to 22nd for pass game coaching, 16th to 18th for run game coaching, with that up arrow as a kind of potential head coach candidate. And I do think Seahawks fans should feel lucky and pretty optimistic with this hire here. I know they've really struggled to find the right offensive coordinator for a while now. But I think Mike McDonald and John Schneider running this team found a good one here in Clint Kubiak. So very optimistic for the coaching staff at large, all getting pretty favorable rankings there for a staff that hasn't really proven too much quite yet here in Seattle, but definitely potential for that to come. But let's now transition to the roster here. All of the shakeup involved with this offense. A lot to break down, but let's start with that quarterback room with Sam Darnold replacing Geno Smith here. So I have the Seattle Seahawks here as we head into the season as the 20th overall ranking in the quarterback room. But Sam Darnold gets that up and down yellow arrow that we use for this series that I use to indicate like his rating of a 76 here could go up and it could go down. And with Sam Darnold, we kind of have to look at him like we do for so many of these young quarterbacks, whether they're rookies or guys like Michael Penix that we just talked about last deep dive. Even if Sam Darnold is heading into his 7th NFL season, I don't think anybody in their right mind really knows for sure who Sam Darnold is as a quarterback. His narrative is just so all over the place with his career that it's tough to know where this is going to land with a multi-year contract coming in to Seattle here. I mean, obviously he was a first-round bust for the first 4 or 5 years of his career. Then he spends a year in what has kind of become the California quarterback rehab facilities of either the Rams or the Niners. He's the backup for Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. And then he goes to Minnesota to compete with J.J. McCarthy. Darnold certainly gets lucky with the McCarthy injury. I think Darnold still might have won that job, but it was very close at that point in time of the injury. McCarthy coming off an exciting preseason performance. But Darnold, he gets that starting job. I don't want to say he wins the starting job. I also don't want to say he was handed the starting job. He himself was looking good in camp. And then for like 15 weeks, really, with the exception of one game against the Jacksonville Jaguars last season, in the first 15 weeks of that Vikings run, he was, again, outside of that one Jags game, clearly a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. In that infrastructure that obviously is favorable to him producing at that level, but he completely broke through, and he looked awesome, and really at about that week 15 mark, I certainly felt like Minnesota was going to have some challenging conversations about what do they do with Darnold, with J.J. McCarthy? Do they kind of Jordan Love J.J. McCarthy and just have McCarthy sit for a few years, give Darnold a multi-year extension? Like, he was really playing obviously the best football of his career, but playing at a level where it was like, all right, has he really kind of gotten comfortable and is emerging as a franchise quarterback here at 28 years old? That was all very reasonable to think based on what we had seen from him in that season, but we obviously know he has a 5 to 6 year resume of being a first-round bust and a backup in the league. And unfortunately and tragically for Vikings fans, that quarterback showed back up at the absolute worst of times. Week 18 against the Detroit Lions in a battle for the division, Sam Darnold really struggled and then followed it up with a hideous performance against the LA Rams in the playoffs, where his offensive line did struggle, but his inability to manage the rush, to make good decisions against, under pressure and against the rush, it was eerily reminiscent of the Sam Darnold seeing ghosts game for the New York Jets, and that inevitably led to the Vikings saying, you know what, we're good. We don't want to risk that version of Sam Darnold being anywhere near our quarterback room. So he hits the market, and the Seahawks ultimately make this decision to go get Sam Darnold. And that's where we're at in the Sam Darnold evaluation timeline. I don't think we have seen the end of this story, and we don't know where this is going to settle for Sam Darnold. The range of outcomes is very, very wide, in my opinion. I think the floor is really, really low with this signing. There is a world where this is a disaster for the Seahawks, kind of moving on from Geno and going to get Sam Darnold. I think that would look something like what Sam Darnold was with the Jets and with the Panthers, where it turns out, okay, he just got really comfortable and got hot with Kevin O'Connell, who's elevated other quarterbacks, not to the level that Sam Darnold played, not nearly the same, but still the idea that, all right, well, yeah, he had Justin Jefferson and Addison and TJ Hawkinson and Kevin O'Connell, and yeah, it was a flash in the pan season, and this is a backup quarterback that Seahawks just gave a bunch of money to. That's the worst case scenario. Now, I don't want to just focus on the bad part of this. Look, like I said, for 15 games last year, Sam Darnold played like a top 10 franchise quarterback last season for the first 15 games of last season. And if he can shake off what happened at the end of the year, get comfortable back here in Seattle, a full offseason preparing as the starter for this team, as their hopeful franchise quarterback, maybe he can get back to that level as something like a top 15 quarterback or so, and that would be a great signing for the Seahawks. This would be a bargain. This would be closer to kind of how we talk about Tampa Bay and how they landed Baker Mayfield. Really no reservations about him as their franchise quarterback at this point in time. That would be the best case scenario for this signing. That's absolutely possible. I really do think with the throws he made, with exceptional arm talent, placement, some of the pocket presence that he showed last year, the play extension. This is a very traitsy quarterback that when he was comfortable last year, really did it all for the Vikings. So there is a high range of outcomes with this signing. And then there's kind of the mid-range too, where he's maybe just a streaky, kind of low-end starter, maybe more of a matchup-dependent quarterback where when defenses are able to light him up and get him under pressure, he's going to make some bad mistakes. He's going to have some really ugly games. But if the play action stuff is working, if you're able to scheme stuff open, he can really get the most of your system and make some really high leverage throws for your offense too on good weeks. Like that's kind of a middle landing zone here. So I don't think anybody can say with any sort of confidence, whether you're in Seattle or you're a Seahawks fan or again, anybody out there can say with confidence what version of Sam Darnold we're going to see with the Seahawks this year and beyond. But it is going to be exciting to find that out. So again, he kind of lands with that narrative as our 20th overall quarterback ranking for this Seahawks team. 20th in passing, kind of right in that range too, 17th to 21st for the QB run multiplier, where you can do some stuff with Darnold, and he's a threat off of play action boots as well. But obviously that 20th ranking could go up to as high as, the kind of 10 to 14 range, kind of where he played last year, or it could go down outside of the top 32, as we've seen him in the past. We will find out. Drew Lock is here. I don't want to spend any time on Drew Lock. We know what Drew Lock is at this point. But Jalen Milroe is a conversation we need to have. I don't think it needs to be that long of a conversation because I actually think Jalen Milroe is a very straightforward quarterback prospect. Traits for days. Milroe is right up there with Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields with genuinely some of the most talented rushing threats or scrambling threats as well to really ever come out of college. I'm sure you could go way back, like, Mike Vick, and, maybe in the 1900s there were some guys too, but probably not a long list of guys like Jalen Milroe with his talents as a runner. That's very self-explanatory. And it's to the extent that I've even had conversations about, okay, as a third round pick here, if you get 2 years into this project and the quarterback development doesn't come, I do think he actually has exceptional upside to be a running back here. And I'm just going to leave it there. People get their panties in a bunch when you say that, but it's not like we've never seen quarterbacks make that transition to a position player. Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator, just worked with Taysom Hill, who did the same thing. So like that pathway is in there down the road because he really is such an elite prospect from that side of the position. But he does fall to the third round because he has so much to improve upon as a passer. Mechanics, accuracy, processing and decision making, you name it. Like everything else other than just raw rushing ability, it is all over the place. Now, he does have the arm talent. I do think he's got a good head on his shoulders too. I like a lot of the stuff he's talked about kind of what he needs to work on if he's going to be a quarterback at the NFL level. And I absolutely think he should go for it. Go be a quarterback in the NFL. But it is concerning that the development did not show up from year 3 to year 4 at Alabama, and he is still heading into the league with all of these issues. But as far as landing spot, doesn't get a whole lot better than this, because to me, Jalen Milroe absolutely could not have gone to a spot where, the team might have considered putting him in there in year 1. He just is not ready for that. So if this was like a Giants or New Orleans where that pathway to playing time was really there, I don't think that's the proper way to go about Jalen Milroe, is kind of putting him in there when he's not ready and ruining his confidence and developing bad tendencies. I think Milroe is a true, like, at least one, more realistically 2 to even 3 year developmental project to get him where he needs to be from a technique standpoint at this position. And then maybe you did find something in the third round here. And again, if not, there is a very serious world where he is not just like an interesting kind of like Denard Robinson type of running back who's like a decent backup running back. Jalen Milroe at 6'2", 225 pounds with legit 4.3 speed, who broke a ton of tackles in college. He could be a franchise running back for you at 24 years old as he heads into that second contract. And you have him as well with a coordinator here that, if nothing else, might be able to mold him into some form of a Taysom Hill type of position package for this team as well. So there is, for a third round pick, there are so many different avenues where this can help this team, whether it's the developmental quarterback with traits that becomes the next day 2 quarterback that does manage to hit, which is very rare in the NFL. There's only so many of those guys, but that is in the realm of possibilities. Or you get a running back out of it, or you get something like a young, even more explosive Taysom Hill out of it. It is well worth the third round pick, and I'm very excited to see where this goes. But that does conclude our quarterback room. Let's go ahead and move forward and talk about the weapons here in Seattle. And this is an interesting group. So they come in with a B- grade for me. They rank 18th to 21st in a league that does have a lot of very talented groups of weapons. So this is a good group of weapons, but it is, the construction of it is very fascinating. I spent a lot of time in this series talking about having complementary skill sets. And I will say Jackson Smith-Njigba and Cooper Kupp together as very clearly your 2 go-to and best wide receiving weapons on this team, it is a very redundant duo that, frankly, if they were a more complementary set of wide receivers, would boost their ranking up a little bit more. It's not just the raw ratings for wide receivers that leads to this, weapons grade. It's how all of the pieces interweave and make sense together. And I do have some questions about these two guys having enough explosiveness and complementary skills to give this team everything they need from this wide receiver group. But it's not all negative there. Like, these are 2 very talented players, especially in the case of Jackson Smith-Njigba, who fully broke through as really everything you could have hoped for him as that first round pick coming out of Ohio State. And he absolutely emerged after a slower start to his career as a demon from the slot. And I think for a couple of years, there's been a bit of a debate in terms of who is the next best slot wide receiver after Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I think JSN slammed that door shut last year. Just doing everything he dominated at Ohio State and transferring that now to the NFL level. Whether that's winning on those option routes, finding those soft spots in zones, took a step forward in terms of run after catch ability, winning tough catches over the middle of the field. And then, a big difference between like a Jackson Smith and Jigba and a lot of other, good but average starting slots in the league is Smith and Jigba does threaten vertically in his own way. He is a great route runner on corner routes where he does set you up to make you think that dig route is coming or even a post route, and he can snap that off and get open on a corner route. He runs really convincing double moves as well. He also tracks the ball and has exceptional body control to come down with slot fades on well-placed throws there too. So not just being that nuisance from the slot, but being able to threaten vertically on certain concepts as well has, I think, settled him in as the second best slot wide receiver in the league. Now, can he be as good as Amon-Ra St. Brown? Some might say so. I still think Amon-Ra has a very, very rare trait in terms of play strength that makes it very challenging for anybody who doesn't really have that size-speed combination of your typical top 5 to top 10 wide receivers. Amon-Ra is able to, in many ways, make up ground because there are a few players in the league that are just pound for pound as strong as St. Brown is, so that helps him after the catch. It helps him at the catch point. It helps him as a run blocker. I do not think Jackson Smith and Jigba has that trait in there. And he is, like an Amon-Ra St. Brown, not someone that's going to stack you outside, not someone that's going to dominate as an outside wide receiver. He can do it if you're in a 12 personnel. He can run routes. He can still function as an outside wide receiver, but he is not at his best as an outside wide receiver because of his physical traits and his lack of physical traits. And I think Seahawks fans are going to get mad at me when I say, in my opinion, now that JSN broke out last year, I would actually bet against there being another leap forward for him. There's still a little bit of room to grow in terms of solidifying himself as like an elite contested catch guy. With his early season struggles last year, he landed at the end of the year at about 46% contested catch win rate. Can he get that up to like Jacoby Myers territory as like a 55% guy? Yeah, probably. But that's probably the last kind of piece that he can prove to me. I don't know. I still view him as someone that has his physical limitations that it's not that he can't be the quote-unquote best wide receiver in your receiving group, but he does absolutely need, in my opinion, something like what DK Metcalf was for this team, not what Cooper Kupp projects for as this team, as someone that can line up outside, win vertically, be an X wide receiver, give you a little bit more size, speed combination, so that JSN can thrive as that short to intermediate demon, as I would describe him. And that's kind of a nice transition to some of my sort of questions on this Seahawks group of weapons. So they bring in Cooper Kupp at 32 years old, who the last 2 seasons has had a hard time getting and staying healthy. He can still play when he's out there, but the separation has fallen off. I think Cooper Kupp in his prime, he had genuinely elite acceleration. Even if he didn't have top speed for a really big wide receiver at 6'2", 215 pounds, his ability to separate at the top of his route, to get off the line, and then maybe most importantly, be a just monster after the catch, that juice, that acceleration is not what it once was. And that was kind of his elite physical trait that is no longer there. Now, he still makes incredibly tough catches through traffic. He's still wicked smart. He's still good after the catch. He can still line up as that kind of 11 and a half personnel player, that kind of quasi tight end in that Sean McVay style offense, and down block a defensive end and do some really special stuff that most wide receivers can't do. But that is a role that would, in theory, take Jackson Smith-Njigba in many formations out of the slot where he is best. And that's where that kind of budding of skill sets gets interesting to me, and how they're going to use these two players is fascinating and puts a little bit of pressure on Clint Kubiak to figure that all out. There are ways you can do it. You can do 3-by-1 formations where these guys are both in the slot, all of those kind of condensed sets where they're both kind of not dealing with press coverage and having to threaten down the sideline. Like, there are certainly ways to use these guys that I don't want to keep this all negative, and I think they will find ways to make this effective, but there is that lack of field stretching ability and a true complementary piece to pair with Jackson Smith-Njigba's skill set here. And then there's also just the risk of, like, yeah, he is 32 years old and has been super banged up. There is the risk that Cooper Kupp isn't available for this team all season long. Like, that feels pretty damn likely at this point. The last 3 seasons, Kupp played 630 snaps last year, 700 the year before that, and 530 the year before that. So the last 3 years, just eyeballing it, he's played about 60%. So he's missed about 1 out of 3 games the last 3 years. Like, do we really think that's just for sure going to come back around and he's going to be fully healthy for them at 32 years old? Like, no, that's pretty damn unlikely. So besides the kind of mashing of skill sets there, you're talking about the likelihood that the Seahawks have to go to further depth is very likely there. So who is that next guy in to be a part of this group of weapons? I mean, you have Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who is quite possibly the most role-specific receiver in the NFL of the last decade. He has been a consistent reference point for your sort of true deep threat, someone that should be at best the 4th best wide receiver on your team, that you have running, you know, a route tree that Seahawks fans are familiar with, kind of the DK Metcalf route tree of go balls and stop routes and deep posts. He's even more limited, certainly, than a DK Metcalf. But Marquez Valdes-Scantling is also infamous, not just for his specific usage, but for having quite possibly the worst hands out of any wide receiver of the last decade. He's certainly got to be in the debate, not just a career 10.5% drop rate. So every time you throw him the ball, there is a 10% chance that he's not going to catch it. And he's had seasons as high as 17%, 14% last year. He is one of the least trustworthy receivers in that sense, but he also really struggles with contested catches. Even if he is, 6'4", 205, he has good size. On his career, he's a 28% contested catch ball winner, which is just horrible, frankly. So he really struggles to attack the football, to kind of win body positioning. Either he is burning by you on a go ball where his long striding speed does present problems for defenses, or he really is not doing much of anything else. You could even start to criticize his kind of stop-start athletic ability. He very much is a one-track athlete where he's straight line speed, but not a good route runner in so many other different areas. So he's not even really like the wide receiver 2 in the event that Cooper Kupp does get injured. He kind of has his place-holding spot as your design deep threat player in this offense, where there's going to be a couple games a year where he makes something happen, and probably 15 games out of year he's either not going to be doing much because defenses are taking away that vertical threat, or he is getting open and he's dropping the ball. So expect about 2 good games from MVS, which is about average for his a season of him on his career. Not to mention he's 31 years old. So if he loses just a little bit of that speed, that's the one good thing he has going for him. So at some point, that's gonna fall off too. But obviously with that, you're still looking for, like, all right, if Cooper Kupp's gonna miss a third of the season, who else can we count on to, like, do other wide receiver stuff other than JSN? And that's where the conversation basically becomes wide open. I mean, Jake Bobo would technically be a Cooper Kupp backup as that big-bodied, thumping wide receiver, one of the best run-blocking receivers in the league. A lot of those packages they have built into this offense where they do want JSN and Cooper Kupp together, Bobo could do that. but I don't think he would just step in and take all of the snaps that a healthy Cooper Kupp would get. It would probably be 5th round rookie Torrey Horton, who is very interesting to me. I like Torrey Horton. I think he does a little bit of everything. He's a good vertical threat. He's got speed. He runs good routes. He made some tough catches. Just a little bit streaky and had some pretty major injury concerns in college, but is a talented player. He is certainly the guy that if and when that Cooper Kupp injury happens, you're going to want to, keep a close eye on him in your fantasy leagues. I even think if you're in like deeper formats, dynasty leagues, like he's someone to, crank up your board a little bit because that opportunity could be there. The talent is in there. I don't know that he's ever going to be a superstar, but could he be a nice wide receiver 2.5 for this team someday? Yes, and I do think that was a good pick, but he is a 5th round pick and far from a certain asset for this team. Ricky White, a 7th round pick. I did not as much see the talent in him as I did in Torrey Horton. He had a lot of fans out there. Now, as a special teamer, they're going to love him. He blocked a bunch of kicks, punts in college. I think he's a tough player, but he just doesn't have standout traits. He lacks size, separation, like really anything at the wide receiver position that would ever make me feel confident that he could be a starting caliber player. Steven Sims gets brought in really to return kicks. Cody White hasn't been able to, break through as anything more than a practice squad level player for them. Derek Young kind of drafted off of his physical traits. That it really is just Torrey Horton in this wide receiver room, and he's kind of a 5th round dart throw. So you can start to see where some of the lack of wide receiver depth is missing, and maybe holds this team back a little bit from ranking a bit higher in terms of weapons. But on top of that, I think a lot of Seahawks fans would tell you, well, yeah, it's Elijah Arroyo, the guy that, they came to the podium after the draft and said, we think he would have been a top 10 pick if healthy, and he's going to play some X wide receiver for us. And you look at the construction of this room and how high they drafted him and what they're saying about him, and you're like, well, yeah, you technically could do that. Do I agree with them that Elijah Arroyo, when healthy, is a top 10 player in the draft and can play X wide receiver? Hell no, I do not agree with that. I couldn't disagree further on the evaluation there on the Seahawks. I had him as a 3rd to a 4th round talent. I was much lower on Arroyo. I think he's very stiff. He offers nothing after the catch. He was not trusted as a contested catch ball winner in Miami's offense. Hopefully that is something he can show to be better at the next level, but that's a projection for a bigger wide receiver that I don't think consistently plays, receiving tight end that I don't think consistently plays with the toughness aspect that you look for at this position. I think he flashed some good routes for sure for a tight end, not for an X wide receiver. He is a very much a stiffer athlete with straight line speed. My comparison for him was Greg Dulcich. And a big part of that as well is he's not a blocker. He has the frame to fill out and become a better blocker, but so many of these day 2 receiving tight ends, whether it was a Greg Dulcich or even up to like the guy ahead of him here in Noah Fant, who was a top 20 draft pick, like he struggled to kind of figure out the blocking thing, and he was an Iowa guy. So I understand that Seahawks fans are excited about Elijah Arroyo, and you believe in what John Schneider and what the Seahawks are saying about him, that he's going to be a big impact for this team this year. I am heavily betting against that. This is a player I'm much lower on, and I frankly don't think he is going to be what they think he is. I very much would project here, and I would love to be wrong about this, but I would project that Noah Fant beats him out as the receiving specialist tight end in this offense, the sort of Juwan Johnson role of sorts, although Cooper Kupp will do a lot of that stuff in this Clint Kubiak offense as well. But we saw it for this offense last year that does feature a lot of heavy personnel. They kind of had a couple different tight ends that did a little bit of everything. Fant would be kind of that more receiving-oriented player, though his skill set, like I said, it's harder to find a good spot for him once you sign Cooper Kupp. He will, of course, play some tight end with his hand in the dirt. But I think when they want to run the football, and when push comes to shove, and it's week 1, and you're further removed from the draft and the theory of Elijah Arroyo, it's going to become much easier for Clint Kubiak to say, No, I want A.J. Barner out there, who played at Michigan and is a full-size dude that I think is projects certainly as a very good blocking tight end in the NFL. He had some good games and some bad games in his rookie year, which is to be expected, but I didn't see enough on tape from Elijah Arroyo to say that he's a better kind of receiving specialist than Noah Fant, who has never reached his upside, but is still a good overall player. He's been kind of efficient when he's been targeted, but just has never been able to kind of break through as a focal point of an offense. But I do still think he's talented and gets open and makes tough catches. And I do think he's a better blocker at this stage in his career than Arroyo will be. But then, yeah, like I said, I definitely don't think Arroyo's going to get those blocking snaps from A.J. Barner. So I think long-term, yeah, they'll probably let Fant go. And because of where they drafted Arroyo, he's going to get an opportunity to emerge as a useful receiving threat in this room in time. But this year, I do not think Arroyo makes much of an impact. And I understand I come off as a hater when I say that, but I am certainly not as high on him as the Seahawks are. And then beyond him, you got Eric Saubert as well. Probably, again, a better blocker than Elijah Arroyo. And I also didn't list Robbie Outs as well, is more of a fullback for them. He's going to eat into that kind of wing player role as well. But that does kind of round out your core pass catchers there. I think clearly you can see that I see a lack of depth and, frankly, outside wide receiver options. There is a complete lack of any sort of real X wide receiver, which I just question if an NFL offense can reach their upside without that. You can do your best to scheme around it, but there's a reason that role exists and has always existed in football, to put more pressure on defenses, because now with DK Metcalf gone, like, defenses can really start to collapse down. And I get that you bring in MVS to try to prevent that from happening, but that can really take away from a lot of the stuff that JSN did so well. And I think even if Metcalf had his frustrations, and I've certainly called out some of those frustrations that Metcalf had, his presence did open things up big time for JSN. And now not only are defenses going to collapse down further, but they know who you're trying to throw the football to. And you're going to see, I think, more double teams heading JSN's way. So this group has a lot to prove and a lot of work to do. We didn't really mention the running backs. You know, Kenneth Walker is a very skilled and explosive pass catcher out of the backfield. They're definitely happy to have him. He doesn't really, quote unquote, move the needle for the overall weapons grade, but he certainly doesn't hold it back either. You're going to get some explosive plays from him, throwing the ball to him in the flat. He can catch a check down, save a drive, make a slot defender miss, and turn a check down on third down into a first down. That's a huge weapon as well. Get you some explosive plays in the screen game too. The drawback to Kenneth Walker is not just health, that he has missed a ton of time in the last 2 seasons, but he is, frankly, based on the tape I've seen, one of the worst pass blocking backs in the entire National Football League. It is really hard to watch at times, and that does lead to Zach Charbonnet getting out there, who is, on the flip side, one of the better pass blocking backs in the league, who can still catch the ball and do some stuff. And even Kenny McIntosh has done some good stuff in the receiving game as well. So it's not so much Walker's skill as a receiving threat holding him back from being more of an impact in this group of weapons. It's that if you're facing any sort of blitz-heavy team for a offensive line that already has its struggles, Kenneth Walker will get your quarterback demolished back there, and they do take him off the field, and that obviously hurts his overall production and ability to make an impact in this group of weapons. So they have players, right? And even if you think I'm low on Jackson Smith and Jigba, the fact that they still rank right around the top 20 in the league, almost with him alone. I mean, I don't want to say that because they do have some other guys to throw the ball to here, but it is, I think, a lot of respect towards what JSN did last year. But there are some very serious questions here in terms of how the ball is really going to get distributed throughout the entire length of the field here. But yeah, let's go ahead and discuss the backfield in the lens of the running game here. And it is a very good backfield. They get a B grade for me. They rank 13th to 16th, so inside the top half of the league for running backs. And frankly, if you could guarantee me that Kenneth Walker would stay healthy, this has got to be a top 10 backfield, right? It's really hard to question the talent of Kenneth Walker backed up by a guy like Zach Charbonnet, but he's missed about 2/3 of the last 2 seasons. He is a smaller back that runs with a very kind of that bowling ball of needles style at times where he does. I mean, he's got good contact balance. He bounces off a lot of tackles, but he does take some pretty nasty hits at his size. I think that has led to a lot of on and off injuries. So they do get dinged for the availability of Kenneth Walker. And it's hard to kind of argue with that at this point because that kind of availability is the best ability has held Kenneth Walker back from being considered a top 10 running back in the NFL. Much more in that kind of 15 to 18-ish range in that conversation. It is just hard when you've only surpassed 1,000 yards in a season once in a 3-year career, and that was 1,050 yards. It wasn't some massive season. But again, from an efficiency standpoint, incredible explosiveness. One of the just more juiced up and shifty backs in the league. Honestly, like Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of in a world of his own right now, maybe Devon Achane, but man, a healthy Kenneth Walker is not too far behind those names in terms of big playability, ability to have some just monster games where if the blocking is right and they can get him into that second level, he is a difference-making running back for sure. So I can't take that away from him, but I do think we're at a point where not only has him missing games held us back from viewing him as a bona fide top 10 running back, but I think we're probably at the point where the Seahawks are aware of those durability concerns, and he is a back that, kind of like we said with Devon Achane, due to his lack of size, where you do kind of factor in who the backup is when Kenneth Walker is the starter, a little bit more with the running back ranking, because the idea that Kenneth Walker is going to or even should get the majority of the workload, that ship feels like it's maybe sailed here. And that could change. But I do think that was a big part of why Seattle drafted Zach Charbonnet as high as they did, and how they're going to go about this year is reduce Kenneth Walker's workload so that they can keep him healthy for hopeful playoff football. Yeah, it's awesome when it's week 4 and you're going against Detroit or Atlanta and he's got these wicked explosive runs. But it's pretty devastating when you get to week 16 in a couple of back-to-back years and he's not there for you. And I know he played in the last month of 2023, but that was after missing essentially all of November into early December. So it definitely lines up with what we're saying here. And that is, to me, where, Zach Charbonnet is probably going to be pretty damn close to a 50-50 split, especially a lot of the kind of short yardage, grind the game out types of touches. Very much you want to go towards Zach Charbonnet in that way, very Tyler Algier-esque that we just talked about with the Falcons, being a compliment to Bijan there. That's where Charbonnet is at his best, that tough running style, more of a power back. Now, he's not the biggest guy in the world. He plays about 215, 220 pounds, but that does give him a little bit more speed, a little bit. He's a little bit more lightweight with some shiftiness and agility as well that some bigger backs don't have. And honestly, last year when Walker was hurt and Charbonnet had to be the feature back here, I saw him tap into that good foot speed that he has at his size more than he has in Seattle, and maybe even going back to UCLA. I felt, especially in that Arizona game, I think I tweeted this out at the time, just kind of wondering what Seahawks fans thought if they saw what I saw, where it seemed like he almost changed his running style a little bit last season, really just pounding those feet, tapping into his fast feet, which just allowed him to cut on a dime a little bit more, be more fleet of foot and agile. I mean, that's where you saw some really big kind of standout sort of starting caliber performances from Zach Charbonnet, where, yes, he can be an excellent backup and complement to Kenneth Walker, but in those games that Kenneth Walker isn't available, he can tote the rock and give you a good running back performance. But ultimately, this is obviously a good running back room. I rank them in the top half of the league. This is kind of like a poor man's version of what Detroit is working with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. That thunder and lightning approach can obviously make a big impact to your backfield. It's just I wish you could guarantee me that Kenneth Walker would be more available, and maybe this is the year where they can find that right distribution of carries so that they can keep him healthy. But we just haven't seen that yet. If they can stick that, this is probably more of a top 10 ranking for the Seahawks backfield. But they do have some backups as well. Kenny McIntosh actually ran hard when he stepped in, when Kenneth Walker did get hurt. He, to me, is more skilled in the receiving game and getting involved as that kind of Samaje Perine-esque third down back that kind of steals 5 to 10 snaps a game for his balance as a receiving back. But he did impress me with some of his carries last year. And then Damian Martinez, honestly, he makes you feel a little bit better, too, about the prospects of a Kenneth Walker injury staring at you down the barrel of the gun because, okay, so he falls to the 7th round because there was apparently an off-field concern with him. I wasn't aware of this when I ranked him as a true third-round talent. Someone that I think in the right spot could have come in and competed for a starting job out the gate. But I guess he did have a DUI in 2023, and clearly teams interviewing him were not super confident. The tape shows you a hard-nosed north and south runner that for a bigger guy has decent breakaway speed, can make you miss in the hole. Again, really like a good running back prospect. Maybe not elite traits to be a high-end guy, but if Kenneth Walker does go down and Martinez is focused and makes this team as a 7th round pick, I think the floor is certainly raised from what they had last year in the event of a Kenneth Walker injury. If Walker is able to stay healthy, you're probably not going to see a lot of Damian Martinez, but certainly someone to keep an eye on. Like if Walker gets hurt again and misses a handful of time, he is heading into a contract year. I think they would love for Walker to stay healthy and they work out a contract for him. But if those durability issues continue to show up, I would expect that Seattle would probably let Kenneth Walker go, in which case Martinez might have a future as at least a split carry situation with Zach Charbonnet, who I do think is just a little bit more limited as well in terms of upside. In fact, I think you could argue Martinez has even higher upside than Charbonnet. Those two guys are pretty damn similar in terms of style. But it's good to have him around there as an RB4 starting the season. And then George Holani, I know Boise State fans are a big fan of him. He got a couple touches last year. Not much to say on him at this point in time. And then undrafted rookie in Jacardia Wright is going to have a hard time making this team. But yeah, really good backfield. We mentioned Sam Darnold for the quarterback run multiplier as well. You get a tiny bit of a boost there. There is actually a lot of potential there. I would actually talk about Jalen Milroe. We have got to kind of see if they want to use him in a Taysom Hill type of role before we attribute that to this team. But if they do, the Seahawks would actually be damn near towards the top of the league for that QB run multiplier component that I do give these teams for this series, because Milroe could actually make a pretty damn major impact on the run game, not just with the numbers advantage that would bring, kind of bringing him in for read options and that kind of stuff, but he himself, as we described, is dynamic with the ball in his hands. And another reason to bring up Milroe, not to beat a dead horse here, but he very much could be in the pipeline for your running back depth as well, where if Walker can't stay healthy, he ends up elsewhere. Okay, you go with Damian Martinez and Zach Charbonnet for a year, maybe a couple of guys with more limited upside. Again, if Milroe doesn't hit as a quarterback, 2027, I am just not afraid to say, there is a world 2 years down the road, Jalen Milroe is a star running back in the NFL. I'm not saying it's likely. I would much prefer that things work out for him as a quarterback, but the upside is there for him. And it's not as unheard of for quarterbacks to switch to skill player as I think some people think. Terrell Pryor, Taysom Hill, Denard Robinson, Logan Thomas. We've seen it done before in recent seasons. But let's round out the offense by discussing the Seahawks offensive line, which there's no way around it. If you're a little bit surprised by the Seahawks coming in as the 22nd ranking team here, this offensive line right here is a massive reason for that, and there is some upside and potential here, but this is a huge wild card for this team, not just the offensive line themselves, but how it plays with Sam Darnold, that showed once the Vikings offensive line started to struggle down the stretch, we saw him really kind of panic in many ways and show some of the old Sam Darnold. So those two kind of components together in so many ways are going to make or break this 22nd ranking and the Seahawks' success this season. But as we head into the year, the Seahawks come in as my 29th overall offensive line. They rank poorly across the board with C- grades in pass blocking and run blocking, where they rank 27th to 28th for pass blocking, 26th to 27th for run blocking. But as we'll go through this group, there is some youth and upside really across the board with this unit. Starting at left tackle with Charles Cross, who took a big leap in year 3 last year. He was good early in his career for a rookie and second-year offensive tackle, but maybe slightly below expectations for a top 10 draft pick in the first couple of years. But year 3, boom, that's the guy you were hoping to see based on where they drafted him. He emerged as something close to a top 10 pass protecting left tackle last year by pass blocking efficiency. That's even better than it sounds. Like, there are so many good left tackles in the league. For Charles Cross to now be in that conversation now heading into year 4, approaching what could be a mega deal for Charles Cross, north of $30 million a year for this Seahawks team, based on how he played last year and the fact that he has gotten better every year. We don't know where the ceiling's going to stop, especially after last year. He really got comfortable tapping into his athleticism as a run blocker. And I think he showed a little more play strength to move guys off the ball in that phase too. So that's been kind of an extra plus for Charles Cross, where coming out, a lot of like Laramie Tunsil comparisons, where you saw everything in there from a pass blocking perspective to get there, but came out of a system at Mississippi State where they just didn't really ask him to get north and south as a run blocker. So maybe a little more uncomfortable with that to begin with, but really looked good last year. And some of the high-end blocks we saw from him and some of the tenacity he showed in the run game paired with his traits, now this guy really is the limit for Charles Cross to be kind of an elite left tackle and to prove to be that type of guy. So you love what you have with him at left tackle. He is frankly saving this group from not being 32nd for offensive line. The fact that that core piece of left tackle, if nothing else, you've got a stud there. But even him has some upside still, I think, potentially to be unlocked there, where he could even go from a great player to an elite player. But then next to him at left guard, you have your rookie first-round pick in Gray Zabel, who I am extremely optimistic for, especially in time. Now, I think he is the best of the North Dakota State prospects that we've seen in recent years. Okay results from those guys. Dylan Raduns, who has not really had a ton of success in the league beyond being a low-end starter, but Cody Mock, who struggled early but then has really settled into a good player for the Bucs. I think Gray Zabel's ahead of those guys, hence why he got drafted a good bit ahead of those guys inside the top 20 of the draft. I think you're looking at a tremendous athlete, outstanding with his hands, good play strength for a guy that isn't too big, and he is such a good athlete. He can actually drive guys off the ball. Now, it was against North Dakota State competition, but his anchor at the Senior Bowl, going against a really good interior defensive line group, his anchor was really a surprise, knowing that he was listed a little bit smaller. He is rocked up and carries a lot of strength relative to his size. So I think all of the traits of a standout guard in the NFL are there. But again, you're talking about a guy going from North Dakota State to the NFL and transitioning from tackle to guard. That's another thing here. He played tackle at North Dakota State. So there's probably going to be some learning moments in there. Maybe there won't be. Maybe he really is just that good. I don't think it's crazy that could happen. But can I come out and rank him as this bona fide stud out the gate? No, I can't. He still has to come out and prove it and earn a higher grade than the 72 rating I have for him here. But I am generally very excited for Gray Zabel. I'm super excited that the Seahawks actually invested in this position group, because now you're putting his potential next to Charles Cross. All right, 2 years from now, could we be talking about this as the best tackle guard combo next to each other in the league? I mean, you really think about it, and it's not that far-fetched, but again, got to come out and prove it. Now, at center and right guard, I have more question marks and, dare I say, doubt, but it's not a lost cause either. So you have Olu Oluwatimi next up at center here. He heads into year 3 after getting this starting job when Connor Williams retired midseason last year. And he was very up and down, but not an unmitigated disaster. He had some rough games in pass protection, certainly. And in the run game, too, like he's not a traitsy player. He's 6'2", 310 pounds. You see the 4.3, 840 coming out, but like you watch him on tape, like he's just not a plus athlete. And especially, this is going to be a very wide zone heavy run game. He was pretty good in what was a little bit more of a north and south run game last year, and they would pull him a good bit. He's actually, I know it's kind of counterintuitive because you think you want to be a really good athlete as a puller, but you also just want to be massive and be able to blow guys up in the hole, and he's pretty good at that. But getting out on the move on wide zone and reaching a 2 technique in this system, there's going to be some question marks there. And even just as a head-up blocker, like he can fall off blocks in that phase too. But he does have the play strength aspect going on for him. I do think he's a tough dude. He's an okay run blocker. Honestly, a big part of his struggles too came with blitz pickup and kind of that side of the center position where you do want this to be a guy that can really not necessarily call out protections. They can put that on Sam Darnold's plate, but that still is a big swing point for a lot of these twists and stunts and blitzing linebackers and stuff. He struggled to pick up a lot of that stuff still in year 2 last year. So you want to see some growth in that department. He's just going to come with some questions as one of the lower rated centers as we head into this upcoming season. And I don't think there's tremendous upside for him, but there is potential for him to settle in as an okay starter for this team. At right guard, I see a lot more upside in Christian Haynes. He is someone I'm really excited now to see get in with a fully kind of wide zone oriented run game, because coming out of UConn, that was what he was, I would say, elite at, frankly. I mean, he's one of the better wide zone blocking interior offensive line prospects in the last several drafts. But everything else on him was suspect. He is a bit lighter in terms of drive blocking guys off the ball for duo and inside zone. And in pass protection, both technique and anchor were concerns. And obviously they didn't like what they saw in Christian Haynes last year. There were even some reports that the coaches weren't happy with his effort in practice. And he ends up basically kind of a non-factor in his rookie season, a healthy scratch, I think, in some points of the season. I still do believe in the upside of this player and the scheme fit. But my 66 overall rating that I put on him is an optimistic projection based on my college evaluation of him, now a year removed from that, and plugging him into a system that is a full-on scheme fit for him. And the fact that they seem to have some form of confidence in him, because at this point in time, there is not any sort of loose competitor, in my opinion, for that job. Not that you feel any bit good about. We can talk about the depth in a little bit, but it is not pretty. I do want to talk about Abraham Lucas next, though. I like Abraham Lucas. I don't think he's the traitsiest tackle ever. He doesn't get incredible depth. He's not this tremendous run block or anything, but he does have really good technique, really strong hands. He's proved to be just like a solid, steady player when healthy, but that has been a massive, massive question mark for him. He has only played in 13 games in the last 2 seasons. When his injury issues first started showing up, it was described, I think it was by Pete Carroll, as degenerative knee concerns, and it has continued to keep him off the field. And now as he heads into the final year of his rookie contract, a player that after a promising rookie season we felt maybe could be a franchise right tackle for them, he feels much closer to a temporary Band-Aid that you're praying can stay healthy than a franchise right tackle. I mean, maybe he can get this thing back on track, but not only is the lack of time played holding back his overall production, but I think it's holding back his development as well. For a guy that already doesn't have a huge arrow pointing up, as a guy that is probably a little bit more maxed out given his physical traits, which are just okay. So where you're unproven at your three interior pieces, you're also unproven at right tackle in the sense of, do you have a guy that can play not just the whole season, but even 2/3 of the season or half of the season? Well, we're about 3 years removed from him doing that for the one time in his rookie season. And that's really why this team, I think, signed Josh Jones, who is a fascinating backup tackle. The Ravens signed him last year because he was a relatively highly perceived prospect that ends up going in the 3rd round of the Cardinals. The interesting thing about him is he's got the traits, but he's only played well as a left tackle. He's tried guard and failed. He's tried right tackle and failed. The Ravens signed him as the Ronnie Stanley backup, and Ronnie Stanley managed to stay healthy. Well, the Seahawks are going about a similar approach here, where their right tackle has had a really hard time staying on the field, as Ronnie Stanley had, but can Josh Jones play right tackle? This is one of those things that it's just kind of hard to know. His track record shows that he's actually really only comfortable on the left side of the line. They don't need a backup left tackle. They need a backup right tackle. It's possible that it's just fluky that he's graded out so poor as a right tackle and so, frankly, great as a left tackle. But the tape is the tape, and this narrative has been out on him for a couple years now. So I mean, based on how the rest of this tackle group is constructed, with Mike Jarrell, who was horrible last year, a 7th-round pick in Mason Richmond, and a couple undrafted rookies, to me, they feel like Josh Jones is a solid answer to Abraham Lucas. They had to have had some sort of conversation there with Josh Jones, like, hey, can you play right tackle? I can't imagine he would say no, but, you know, there's a world where he goes in at right tackle as the backup and he really struggles. There's also an interesting world where he actually plays pretty well there and maybe even has potential to be their franchise tackle if he can play as well as he's played at left tackle, which was a couple years ago for the Cardinals, if he can play that well at right tackle. But kind of a wild card in his own right as a backup tackle here. And then just to kind of round out the rest of this group, as we mentioned, the interior depth is horrible, man. Like, you are really hanging your hat on those top 3 guys working out, because Anthony Bradford hasn't shown really a lick of development since he came into the league. Just kind of a smashing, big-bodied guard that you can plug in as a backup who's had some experience. Sateo Lamea had to play last year. Oh my God, it was brutal. I don't know that there was a guard that had a worse pass blocking efficiency than Lamea when he had to play, but he's kind of a developmental athlete. Bryce Cabledew, kind of a nasty run blocker, tested well coming out of Kansas. Maybe there's something there. He's probably the only other guy that you're somewhat encouraged by. Jalen Sundell stepped in and played one game as a center for them and was okay in that game. He's familiar, played next to Gray Zabel in college, so that's fun at least. So probably Cabledew and Sundell, and then maybe development from Lamea would be what you're, attaching hope to, but none of those are proven backup commodities at all. And I would love for Seattle to go out in free agency. Maybe none of these guys exist, but there's got to be someone out there with some center guard flexibility that could just be kind of a swingman on the interior to give you more of an answer to depth, because the probability that Oluwatimi and Haynes are good here, it's frankly pretty low. It's possible, but it's just not likely that all these guys hit. It's a lot of pressure on their offensive line coach, to say the least. But thus concludes our offensive line conversation. Like I said, really the ultimate wild card. I like some of the upside that they've got going on here, but a lot of question marks, and a group that could frankly derail this team's season, as we've seen in years past, where with this Seahawks team, even if they're making some efforts with a Gray Zabel first-round pick to hopefully head in the right direction here, that would be ideal if we walk out of this season and feel like, for the first time seemingly in years, that the Seahawks offensive line is 22nd in the league. This has been a bottom 5 unit for what feels like a half decade at this point. And at least for this season, they run the risk of that happening again, even if this kind of youth movement could eventually get them out of that gutter. But that does wrap up the entire offense here. So The Seahawks offense at large comes in as my 26th overall offense. It's just, man, when you've got questions at quarterback, massive questions on the offensive line, and your group of weapons is good, but some redundancy of skill set, and it's not an elite group, it's just tough to imagine the Seahawks offense taking the world by storm this year. There is clearly some upside going on here, but as I rank these teams at their floor heading into week one, that's not going to be the case for these rankings. They are at least balanced, 23rd in passing game and 24th in run game with C+ rankings across the board there. But needless to say, these question marks related to this offense are a big part why this Seahawks team does rank with our 22nd spot in these power rankings. But at the same time, a lot of excitement with this Seahawks team does come from this defense, a unit that does have a chance under Mike Macdonald's leadership to be a really nice group this year, if not a special one. But let's start with the defensive line, a unit that I would say is a good unit, but not a great unit, and doesn't have too much upside to be this kind of difference-making top 10 defensive line that ultimately might hold the Seahawks back from having that sort of fear factor of a defense, but that is where you hope it's a good enough unit, and the way Mike Macdonald is able to pick matchups and scheme these guys up with blitzes can bridge the difference there. But let's get into it. Let's start on the edge. There's a lot of depth with this defensive line. That is probably the best thing you can say about it, is they run about 7.5 deep with this group, and it's a very heavy rotation of starters. These guys will stay fresh and play more efficiently here than they would elsewhere. I did want to go ahead and list the two younger, more exciting pieces here as the starters, but I do think from a snap count perspective, it's going to be damn near even between Derek Hall, Boye Mafe, Dexter Lawrence, and then maybe Uchenna Nwosu a little bit behind those guys. But I do think Nwosu's going to play a good bit too. But Hall and Mafe are definitely the guys Seahawks fans are going to attach the thought of upside to, as both these guys are younger and kind of playing for second contracts here in Seattle, especially Boye Mafe, who's heading into the final year of his rookie deal. Derek Hall a year behind him. Both these guys second-round picks. Both guys very different styles of players, but both guys have kind of had similar trajectories. Both these guys struggled as rookies and had really nice year twos. Boye Mafe's third year took a little bit of a step back from year two. Another reminder that development isn't always a straight line trajectory for these guys. But who do you want to start with? I think you start with Mafe, who you still view probably as the better overall player, though I think I would say Derek Hall was the better pass rusher last season, certainly the more efficient one. But yeah, I would love to see Boye Mafe, who, like I mentioned, took a step back in year three from what he was in year two, a pretty sizable step back. He goes from 22nd in pass rush win rate in 2023 to 57th in that metric last season. And to me, I think that's for a reason. I think the tape got out on Mafe, who did have success in that second season with that nasty cross chop that he has. He has a nice first step. He can get that arm over. He's got enough play strength and natural bend and athleticism to finish that move off. But I think once tackles knew that was coming, Mafe really failed to bring a second counterpunch to the table as tackles were shutting that move down much more. And I think the traits have always been in there for him, even going back to Minnesota, to have a bull rush, and it just hasn't come out with him. And I think at this stage in his career, it's fair to question if he has that power in there. But it doesn't have to be that. You know, there's other different moves he could break out to keep tackles honest and not defend him in one certain way. But I think last year it was really, he was either winning off of a twist or a stunt where he is super athletic and you can scheme him up that way, or he was winning with that cross chop. You didn't see him win in too many other ways. And kind of for that reason, I actually don't put the up arrow on Boye Mafe. Not every player under the age of 25 necessarily has to get better. I think he's a pretty good player right now. I also love that he uses his good size and effort and athleticism to defend the run. He's a very nice 3-down player, someone that you can give a nice extension to be a part of this deep group as kind of a 3B type of player. Can he theoretically be more than that? Yes, he does have the physical traits to do it, but the lack of that development last year would have me pump the brakes that he can get there. But that's kind of where I'm at with Boye Mafe. And that kind of leads you to get more excited about Derek Hall, who, like I said, I do think last season was actually the better, more impactful, more efficient pass rusher than Mafe. Now, he's not the run defender and the 3-down player that Mafe is, and that's where that rotation of Lawrence and Nwosu is really nice to have, because those guys are really good run defenders. But getting Hall to come in fresh with that bull rush that he has, I mean, he is kind of the opposite of Boye Mafe, where Derek Hall's bull rush is his fastball, and man, did he unlock it last year. And that was so encouraging to see, because, dude, Hall, I thought was a really promising second-round pick. It was just a complete non-factor of a rookie season. I don't know why it didn't work for him, but that was what he did at Auburn. He's like 6'2.5". He's got these long, strong arms. He's got a good first step, and he can just pile drive you. He's kind of like a poor man's Jared Verse in many ways in this division. And he obviously didn't do what Jared Verse did last year, but his ability to really penetrate that pocket, to compress the pocket, force the quarterback to step up and, walk into some of these guys like Leonard Williams and Jaron Reed and even Mafe, sometimes like looping around on a stunt. Like that is such a valuable trait to have that can impact a defensive line and can continue to impact a defensive line. But if you can now build off of that and maybe develop a more consistent rip move and maybe become a more consistent run defender, which, to be fair, that was something he struggled with back in college too. But that as a baseline is really exciting. And I think year 3 for Derek Hall is going to be really interesting to see. Okay, is he going to be this kind of, let's say, Bud Dupree-esque missile launcher of an edge rusher who never really develops too much else? Or is he, I don't want to say he can be Jared Verse, because Jared Verse was so special in his rookie year, but, maybe something a little bit closer to that in terms of having more of a complete game. I'm excited to see it from Derek Hall. I think he could basically either be what he was last year, which is just like Boye Mafe, a good kind of 3B piece in this rotation who you kind of scheme around his lack of awareness in the run game, or he could be more than that. But like I said, even if I ran out of room for them on the graphics, DeMarcus Lawrence and Uchenna Nwosu are just as much starters as Hall and Mafe. So Lawrence comes in, coming off a season-ending foot injury at 33 years old, getting like a 3-year, north of $30 million contract. Now, they can get out of it after 1 year if he can't get back healthy. But obviously his age and coming off the injury, you got to at least have some questions. But when he has played over the last 3 years, he's still a really good player. He's obviously not the defensive player of the year candidate version of himself that he was back in like 2017, 2018. But he is still one of the better heavy-handed run defending edge rushers in the league, which does just make him such a good complement to someone like Derek Hall, who struggles in that department. And if nothing else, I do think he's going to help in that regard. But he can still get after the quarterback. He's got a ton of pop in his hands. You can't be the run defender he is without that. But he can still win with a bull rush and a variety of other different ways. He's still a really useful player. It's more of just like availability and snap count, I guess, questions with him. Like, I don't really look at him as a full-time starting caliber player, because at his age, we see this with some of these edge rushers around this age. It's like, yeah, they're useful, but you have to at least consider, like, yeah, you can't really give him the full workload in terms of durability and stamina. But when he's out there, he's going to be a very useful player. And then Uchenna Nwosu is much more of a question. I mean, he has missed almost all of his games the last 2 years. When he's healthy, he's a really nice early down kind of edge outside backer, which in this system, they do want that guy, someone that can drop into coverage, that can defend the run from a 2-point stance. If they're going to have all these dynamic blitzes where you don't know who's dropping into coverage, Uchenna Nwosu gives them the most in that department. So for all those reasons, he will play. Now, from a pass rush perspective, there's just not a ton there with him. He can run stunts, and he's not useless, but in terms of winning one-on-one reps, that's not really what he's here to do. He's more here as a complement to this scheme. And that's really your core rotation of 4 starters on the edge, which also consists of your depth. If everybody kind of stays healthy here, I don't even know if they will play a 5th guy here all that much. Tyreek Smith especially, just he hasn't worked out coming out of Ohio State, hasn't been able to show. He had a balanced skill set coming out. I thought he might emerge as kind of a decent backup. He's bounced between here and Arizona, I think, a couple times, and just hasn't really been able to carve out any playing time. Jared Ivey, on the other hand, he would be more of the fascinating 5th piece in this quote-unquote edge group. Now, he's kind of in line with more so with like Mike Morris and Riley Mills. We'll see exactly how they want to use Jared Ivey. Ivey's about 6'4", 280, kind of played a heavy-handed 5 technique defensive end in college. This is such a multiple front that this is a unit where edge and interior defensive line can be a little bit more interchangeable with a lot of these guys. But yeah, I loved Ivey's run defense coming out. And he had some very, few and far between examples of winning with the bull rush. But he goes undrafted because of just a brutal testing profile that I think surprised a lot of teams with how unathletic he tested, but still should have been drafted, in my opinion. I mean, he really should be right in there for all intents and purposes with Mike Morris and Riley Mills as kind of that hybrid and early down or potential later down stunt man. Although if Ivey isn't very athletic and doesn't have much of a first step, probably more of just a run defense oriented player, but a good undrafted pickup nonetheless. Now, let's talk about the interior of the defensive line, that they themselves have really 3 core starters, and the depth is not so great with the interior there, but they do have 3 guys that are kind of viewed as starters here. So Leonard Williams, the first of which obviously, and in my opinion, the best player on this defensive line, really just such a good fit with Mike McDonald's defense, all the multiple fronts. He can play a lot of 5 technique, a lot of base end when they do go 3-4, kind of a 5-1 penny front. That was when he was at his best back with the New York Giants, was in Patrick Graham's defense, where he was almost more of an edge player than an interior player. But he's not super undersized, but he is smaller for a defensive tackle. So if you can get him in more of a penetrating role as a 3 tech or kind of that heavy-handed defensive end role as a 5 technique, that's when he's at his best as a run defender. And they do a really good job making sure he stays in those types of looks against the run here in Seattle. That's a credit to Mike McDonald for sure. But he's good in those spots. But I also think Leonard Williams really proved last year, like, there are very few defensive linemen better at defending wide zone runs than him. Like, he gets that 84 run defense grade for us because when you do kind of isolate him and run a double team at him, he can give up some ground and have some lesser moments as a run defender. But he is such a tremendous athlete for a interior defensive player or as a 4-eye or a 5 tech. Maybe not the fastest guy necessarily, but his overall just kind of contact balance and the way that he can ride the wave and find the ball and then have the just foot speed and ability to finish tackles on wide zone. Tremendous, like elite wide zone run defender. And obviously so many teams, even just in this division, you have 3 Shanahan style offenses that base their run game out of wide zone. So like, yeah, it's just one run concept where he's elite at, whereas he's otherwise just kind of average to maybe even below average. Hard to kind of rank that. That's where he lands in that sort of stud tier for run defense. But you at least have to mention, like, don't run wide zone at Leonard Williams. And even as a backside player, he's so good at finding the ball. So wanted to give him his credit there. And then as a pass rusher, he kind of is what he's been for so long, where he's kind of the ideal number 2. He's going to get you probably about 50 to 60 pressures, somewhere between 5 to 12 sacks. He's a really good number 2. He's never really put it all together to have a dominant bull rush or this go-to finesse move where he can, consistently dominate as a pass rusher, but he is clearly very good in that department as well. Now, is it ideal that he's your best defensive lineman in the case of Seattle here? No, I certainly would argue it's not. You'd rather have more of an alpha and have Leonard Williams be your Robin, whereas here they kind of need him to be Batman, and it does leave them falling just a little bit short in terms of those total rankings for that reason. But I do love Leonard Williams, and he's found a really good home here. The pick that he had against Aaron Rodgers dropping into coverage too, great example of the athleticism we're talking about. And just, again, like the idea that your 4 technique can drop into a hook zone and provide like cross-field coverage. That's a fun little threat that this defense has. Let's talk about Byron Murphy next. Even if Jarran Reed is probably the second best interior defensive lineman right now, Byron Murphy is the biggest wild card for this defensive line. And if this unit's going to find a Batman or become a top 10 defensive line, it would be Byron Murphy reaching his potential. To me, he was a top 10 player in last year's draft. Seattle ends up getting him in the mid-teens of the draft, so he doesn't fall too far behind that. But his rookie season, I would say, was disappointing. Now, it wasn't like, oh my God, he's a bust, this is terrible type of stuff, but someone that definitely had those expectations by myself and many. He was more of just a adequate, maybe even below average for a first-round defensive lineman, but he was dealing with some injuries. And his snap count was a little bit more reduced as well because Jarran Reed played so well here. But even if he struggled to really make an impact for this defense last year, it wasn't so bad that I'm really ready to abort the thought that this is a player with tremendous potential. His first step, his athletic ability, his bend for the position, his raw core power, I still think it's in there. And there were some minor flashes where you could see it, that rip move, that ability where he is so good, or at least was in college, at faking one way on you and then kind of Euro step ripping to your other shoulder. For one reason or another, he just wasn't able to break that out last season as much as you would hope. You did see it. There was a rep against the Bears where he flushes Caleb Williams from the pocket with that move. It's like, all right, it's in there. But I do think where he probably was the most disappointing was he had that in college, but he also had a bull rush. And I thought the bull rush would translate much sooner coming out of college than it did last year. You would see him go to that bull rush, and he just wasn't able to create that push that he was in college. And then it's like, all right, so the bull rush isn't as much of a threat. Guards are able to play him a certain way, and that's where you saw the efficiency just wasn't so great. He ends up with 21 pressures on 244 snaps. That's certainly not horrible. Ends up just getting the quarterback one time. PFF pass rush grade 64.5. Like, again, not an impact player, not even a tragic season as a pass rusher, but with a lot of expectations, you certainly know there's more in there. And I still think his upside to be kind of in that Quinnen Williams, Justin Simmons breath, where even, okay, these aren't Nick Bosa, Chris Jones level guys, but if you give that player the right pieces around him, can that type of guy be your best overall defensive lineman? If, like you have here, you got 4 other dudes that can win, that can be a very nice setup for them. So I would love to see that step from Byron Murphy. But right now, based on what we saw in his rookie season, he's more of just kind of a balanced average starter, which obviously would be disappointing for Seahawks fans based on his expectations coming in. So he gets that wild card icon next to him. If he can take that step forward, I think that would be the easiest path for Seattle to become this, bona fide like top 5 defense, really, is what we're ultimately looking for, is them to take that big step. And he could be a big part of that. Jarran Reed is, like I said, right now probably your second best interior player. He is 33 years old, but they give him a 3-year, $22 million extension. They really didn't have a choice. I mean, he kind of kept Byron Murphy kind of off the field at times. I mean, he had a career year last year, 48 pressures, 4 sacks, career high in pass rush grade per PFF. Year 9 was a lucrative one for Jarran Reed. So he's back. I mean, again, that was kind of an outlier season, but he's always had a variety of different ways that he's won. You haven't seen like true physical regression, obviously. So he's just a very nice player to be a part of this starting rotation. And they do, by the way, run a lot of 5-man fronts where these three are all able to get out there on the field together, or 4-man fronts where Leonard Williams can play a little bit of defensive end too. Overall, you're happy to have him. He's a nice, useful player. He's not a horrible run defender either. It's not the strength in his game. He's a better pass rusher. You're hoping Byron Murphy takes that step, and then Jerron Reed can settle in as one of the better third defensive tackles in the entire league, instead of that dynamic being flipped where Murphy's your number 3. Certainly a floor raiser nonetheless. And then the depth gets much more shaky. You've got Jonathan Hankins, also at 33 years old. I mean, he's a space-eating nose tackle, doesn't really get off blocks or make a whole lot of plays anymore. He's really just there for his experience and his weight. But it's a role that has its usefulness. We mentioned Mike Morris, Riley Mills, kind of these, day 3 hybrid end dart throws that they've made that have kind of lumped Jared Ivey in there with them. Kind of your Leonard Williams backup. Someone that can maybe eat 5 or 10 snaps in certain base looks. That I think is, that collection of players is really what they're looking for there. Riley Mills did have some athleticism. He had some pass rush wins at Notre Dame. Kind of a nice high motor player that doesn't really have any go-to ways to win. So 5th round pick there, maybe he could surprise, but probably all just kind of competing for a role-playing kind of 5th defensive lineman spot. Quentin Bohanna, more of your backup nose tackle to Jonathan Hankins. And then Brandon Peely, they also picked up among a couple other undrafted rookies. So they actually are a little bit thinner on the interior of the defensive line than you maybe would realize. Obviously, you have kind of one extra deep with a starting caliber player, but you probably wish they had one more body in there that you felt a little bit better, especially as a run defender for earlier downs. Not a big deal at all, but maybe a slight note on that front. But yeah, your overall defensive line rankings for the Seahawks are just solid. They come in 17th to 18th overall, 18th to 22nd for pass rush, 12th to 16th for run defense. You got a ton of different bodies. It's just everybody's kind of being asked to play a rung up than you would hope. Leonard Williams is more of a 2. You're asking him to be a 1. Mafe and Hall are frankly more 3s. You're asking them to be 2s. Lawrence, more of a unique conversation given his age, but then even Reed and Murphy. Okay, Reed as a number 2 defensive tackle is actually probably just fine, but he is 33 years old, coming off a career year. Byron Murphy, you're asking him to take a big step forward. So there's a little bit of potential there, especially with Murphy, maybe a little bit with Derek Hall. But overall, this unit does give them a very nice floor. Their ceiling is raised by Mike McDonald. Just would be nice to have a little bit more of a number 1 presence with this defensive line. But we can now move on to the second level of this defense with the linebackers, which I think is a much more simple conversation now, especially after last year. They kind of sorted through a bunch of different names and eventually landed on these 2 guys here, Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight. And now heading into really the first year of these 2 guys, definitely the first 2 years of these guys working together for an offseason as starters. There's reason to believe that this can be a really nice duo, if not like a slightly more limited upside group. But I think you're looking at a group that can certainly raise the floor and be more than enough for this Seahawks team. So they obviously go and get Ernest Jones midseason last year and was just a really nice fit here in Seattle. It's kind of funny because Tennessee running Mike McDonald's defense, he did kind of get to learn the defense in Tennessee, but they basically didn't view him as a contract player for one reason or another after they had traded for him. And Ernest Jones, looking for that contract, ends up coming here to Seattle, and they end up working it out with him. He ends up getting a little bit less, though, than I think many expected. 3 years, $28.5 million, so under $10 million a year. Certainly less than Ernest Jones, I think, was hoping to get after being kind of considered like a top 10 linebacker coming off that 2023 season, with the Rams. So he's obviously had a very interesting road over the last year, but he's really settled in as just a good linebacker here, if not a little underpaid. He's an excellent run defender, has a great nose for the ball. He's a very secure tackler. That might be what you like the most about him. Career 7.1 missed tackle percentage has been pretty steady throughout his career. We've talked about a couple of guys like Caden Ellis and even the guy that left here in Jordan Brooks. Like, those guys have had a much higher missed tackle rate, and Ernest Jones Even if he isn't quite the athlete those guys are, he finds ways to wrap guys up more consistently. So you love what he brings to the table in the run game. From a coverage perspective, he is just a little bit more limited. He isn't a tremendous athlete, so his range and ability to man guys up, it's just not exactly what you're looking for in a number one linebacker, but he's got some instincts. He's a guy that's kind of consistently made a couple plays throughout the season in coverage, but generally speaking is someone that can probably be targeted in coverage and not be a huge strength to your pass defense. And then you have Tyrese Knight, who in many ways is kind of just a clone of Ernest Jones, kind of a mid-round pick with a great nose for the football, plays with all the tenacity you look for in this position group, a really steady tackler, but not the biggest guy, not the most tremendous athlete. He still has a lot to prove in coverage, especially, he doesn't have that track record of several plays a year where Ernest Jones has shown some instincts in coverage. But I do think from a run defense perspective, I was a big Tyrese Knight fan, even to the point where it was a draft win for me, where he came off the board in the 4th round, and I was ringing the bell. I was like, hell yeah, I had him right in this range, and everyone was like, who the hell is Tyrese Knight? I'm like, look out for him to be a player on this Seahawks team, and I love that even in a rookie season, he found his way on the field and ended up playing pretty damn well, given the expectations, and I'm excited to see him kind of settle in as a starter here. I expect him to kind of make a name for himself and settle in as really just another Ernest Jones in so many ways. These guys really do have a lot of similarities. Makes sense why they like both these guys and have a lot of confidence in this duo heading into the year. Now, these guys can't get hurt. Otherwise, the Seahawks are going to have to go to the free agent well. I think, Drake Thomas and Josh Ross were good college football players with really horrific physical measurables. So, you like their IQ for the position, but there is a cutoff at some point where you just can't get to the right place at the right time against NFL athletes, and I think that's probably been the book on those two players. And then you got undrafted types in Patrick O'Connell and Derek Jackson as well. So the depth here is concerningly poor. Neither Ernest Jones or Tyrese Knight have any reason to believe they're going to miss time, but certainly worth noting that they don't have another guy to step in there. So overall, the Seahawks come in 21st for linebacker, a little bit lower in coverage as you would expect based on what we talked about, 23rd to 25th with a C grade there. But for run defense, they do come in 17th with a B- grade. Pretty damn solid there. At the end of the day, just not a group that's probably going to make or break this defense, but some fun players in there nonetheless. But then we go to the Seahawks secondary. Not quite the Legion of Boom, but it is a really nice secondary. They come in pushing the top 5 for secondary. There's kind of this big cluster of groups that are sniffing the top 5, ranking 5th to 11th with a B+ grade for DB coverage. And obviously a huge part of that is Devon Witherspoon, their star corner, their bona fide CB1 here, who's... I think he's just waiting on that 1 year where he kind of breaks through and supplants himself into the kind of top 5 cornerback conversation. He's been so good. He only has 1 career interception. He did get picked on a little bit more last year because they do ask so much of him. Like 1 week to cover number 1 receivers. The next week, play like a big nickel style slot corner and, throw your head in against the run as a 180-pound player against a team that's out there, running a bunch of 2 tight end, 12 personnel stuff. They just do ask so much of him. And again, maybe hasn't broken through as a bona fide top 5 corner, but anything short of that, this guy deserves all of the praise you can throw at him. The fact that he can play any sort of coverage, he's got the quick twitch athleticism to deal with shorter corners, quicker wide receivers in the slot. He has the speed to hang on the outside. He has the anticipation to play off-zone coverage and make plays that way. Yes, the interception total hasn't come, but he does have 16 pass breakups in his first 2 seasons here, which are good numbers. He might not have elite size to contest the football against bigger wide receivers, but he is frisky as all hell and will be competitive in those types of looks. And he is a guy that just does have better play strength than his size would indicate, so he's not really going to get thrown around out there like you might think for a lot of smaller corners like him. So I just love Devon Witherspoon. I even put the up arrow on him. He's still only 24 years old. It is tough when you're basically playing two positions here at slot corner and outside corner, depending on the formation. Still, I think time for him to cement himself as a kind of truly elite top 5, maybe even like top 3 corner. It is a volatile position too. So like that year could be coming at any given moment. But I do just think the world of Devon Witherspoon. Have no bad words really to say about him, and he's a core reason why the Seahawks as a secondary are threatening the top 5 for secondary ranking. You do have some other good pieces here as well, though. Riq Woolen had a lot of hype in his rookie season. I think he has settled back in as just a good CB2. He is a limited player in terms of skill set. He is stiffer. He just is. And when you watch the tape, you do see a lot of receivers kind of snap off their break, and Riq Woolen can't quite throttle down, change direction, cut off some of those shorter or intermediate routes in the way that you would want a true number 1 corner to do. I will also say he improved his run defense last year. Credit to him, credit to this coaching staff to getting practical run defense out of him. The first 2 years of his career, I mean, he got benched in his sophomore season because he could not and would not tackle. So he's getting better in that phase, but still not great. So he has some deficiencies in his game, but the straight line speed, the ability to take away any sort of vertical threat that you have coming his way, really with ease. I mean, his long striding, true 4.3 speed, not just taking it away, but you don't even really want to test him because he's got better ball skills than most deep threats in the league. It's obviously an elite strength of his to run the boundary and not get stacked and convert interceptions when they are thrown his way because he is a former wide receiver. And I do think his zone IQ, his anticipation from off zone has gotten better in his rookie season. I mean, you watch like the playoff game against the Niners in his rookie season, they had pegged him as someone that we can run dig routes and stop routes on this guy all day long. Because not only does he lack the physical traits to cut that stuff off, as I described, earlier in his career, he wouldn't even anticipate it. You could really have your way with him. It just took a Kyle Shanahan to really figure that out. I do think the last couple of years he's gotten in the lab and understood those route combinations much better to take away some of those dig routes and underneath developing routes a little bit better so that he's not just defending the deep ball. He's able to take away the counterpunch to the deep ball from these wide receivers as well. So he's a really good number 2 corner, if not a little bit more matchup dependent, and should be someone that gets a payday here in Seattle, especially because you have a Witherspoon to be your number 1. Riq Woolen just sticking him on the outside and really not having to worry about it, I think is a really cozy setup for Seattle, and I like him there. Things get a little bit more muddy with who the third corner is here, so I'm going to put that on pause for now and actually talk about the safeties, because you really have 4 core starters here in Seattle, and then the way that they do this scheme, you kind of got a rotation of your 5th defensive back. But Julian Love is your number 1 safety, tremendously underpaid at this point. They got him locked up before the safety market really spiked. He gets like $10 million a year. In a world where guys like Cameron Bynum and Trayvon Merrick are getting 16, 17 million, Julian Love's a better player than those guys, and he's probably even more versatile. He has converted from slot corner to really free safety, especially last year in this system. Shows that he's got range and playmaking on the back end, the ball skills that you look for, the anticipation you look for to be, maybe like a poor man's Jesse Bates, where he's not quite on the efficiency level, but can still stay deeper than the deepest while also taking risks to make plays from that free safety position. But with that slot corner experience, he can man up from the slot. He runs those hybrid split safety coverages, cover 4, really, really well to kind of turn and run and convert into slot corner. He can do it all from the safety position outside of being like this full-sized impact in the box, because he is a little bit smaller for a safety. But they don't ask him to do that. He's either playing split safety, where at most you're going to buzz him down from a top-down alignment, or he's rotating deep. And then next to him, you have Kobe Bryant, who also does a lot of that split safety stuff, another former converted slot corner, who is a natural at running quarters and buzzing down and manning up tight ends. Like, he has done that and is comfortable doing that. But he definitely was better off, physically speaking, as a safety. He, to me, always was a little bit more of a limited athlete. He just doesn't have a ton of speed, even his kind of change of direction. He just always felt more like a safety, so it makes sense. This coaching staff comes in, makes him a safety, and he plays really well, plays just like so many converted corners to safety in similar systems like this. And I think he established himself as a really nice player that can do a little bit of everything. I'm not ready to say he's going to ascend to being a superstar or anything like that. I just don't know that he has those types of traits, but he is balanced and does bring seemingly a little bit more size down in the box than Julian Love. Even if their weight is pretty similar, Bryant does have a couple extra inches, maybe a little bit more length. So when they do have just two safeties out there, Bryant would be, from a tendency perspective, more of the strong safety, though both these guys will be more of that kind of split safety type of look. Now, like I said, your sort of fifth starter here is very much a rotation depending on the formation they want to be in. Mike Macdonald loves, going back to his time in Baltimore and even here with Seattle, where a Rayshon Jenkins was a halftime starter for this team. He loves three safety packages and using that kind of big nickel look where your third safety is kind of a half linebacker, half slot corner, half strong safety. Yes, I know my math doesn't add up there, but you get the point. And that's where Nick Emmanwori comes into play. He made so much sense as a target for them with his traits. And he has so much upside in that role. And I'm very excited to see this, though I was a lot lower on Nick Emmanwori as a prospect. Was in a lot of first-round mock drafts. He has that crazy combine. A lot of people had him as safety one. And I watched the tape and I could not get there. And if you want an even further dive into that, I do encourage you to check out my safety rankings because my thoughts on that side of things haven't really changed. I will say, though, him landing here with Mike Macdonald in this system, in this specific role, I got a question in a mailbag podcast, like, which prospects do you feel worse about your evaluation now that they've landed in the right spot? Nick Emmanwori, I think, was my number one answer for that. Because in college, he was used as a deep split safety type of safety for the vast majority of his snaps at South Carolina. And I just don't think he was good at it. I don't think, as well as he tested, he's not a fluid athlete to play those coverages on the back end. When the ball was in the air, this dude panics. He has really no deep ranging ball skills at all. He was also really poor at reacting to different kind of misdirections and playing the run from a deep safety alignment. However, in the small amount of looks where South Carolina would stick him down in the box in have-to-have-it run defense situations, he did show a little bit more flashes there. And I do think his best coverage came on hook zones and curl flats, where he just kind of uses his length and reads and reacts to the quarterback's eyes instead of having to really break down, leveling concepts and route combinations and all of that. And in this role, in the Kyle Hamilton role of this Ravens-inspired defense, I'm excited to see it. I don't think Nick Emmanwori has the instincts of a Kyle Hamilton. I don't. But he also didn't have the opportunities to show that. So maybe if there's just a little bit more instincts in there, and then you factor in just how freaky of an athlete this guy is, yeah, there is a lot of potential for this to be something like the reincarnation of Cam Chancellor. Now, that to me is disrespectful to Cam Chancellor. That would be a 1th percentile absolute best case scenario with Nick Emmanwori. But the aesthetic is at least going to be elite in these Seahawks jerseys. But needless to say, I do think the scheme fit is exciting. Would I go out on a limb a little bit and say Kevin Winston Jr. getting to play this same system in Tennessee would have been my pick over Nick Emmanwori? Yeah, he was my preference there, but only by a slim margin. And the fact that he didn't go in the first round, they get him in the second, I think that is certainly closer to where I evaluated him as a second to a third round prospect, basically off of the physical traits alone. But if things go well here, Emmanwori will basically be a full-time starter. where this will become a base big nickel defense. Devin Witherspoon will slide outside a lot more, I think, with Eman Worry if he is as good as he could be. And then Eman Worry is kind of your starting slot nickel defender. Just like they do in Baltimore, where 3 safety is really the world they want to live in. And then maybe you get into dime packages where your CB3 has to come in and be more of a cover corner, or you might rotate a Kobe Bryant or Nicky Manwari off the field, depending on who you feel is the better deep cover player at whatever point in time that is. You can't only live in the big nickel like 100% of the time, but that's probably the vision that they have, is that your Josh Jobe, Shaq Griffin role in this defense is really, really limited to more of a dime outside corner role where you're playing 1 or 2 specific coverages, dealing with number 3 wide receivers, and you can really limit that impact that player has on the defense. And that's really why they didn't invest in another cornerback here when their CB3 spot is really as poor as it is. And that takes you to the Josh Jobe conversation. He played better than Trey Brown did and kind of carved out this role in the same style defense as we've described. Like I said, Rayshawn Jenkins was in many, many ways their third corner, but Jobe did eventually have to play, and you could pick on him. It's just kind of the fact of the matter. I mean, if you felt better about this corner spot, you're probably talking about the Seahawks as a bona fide top 5 secondary as opposed to just pushing the fringe of that. And when you do get this team into true passing downs, quarterbacks are probably going to look where Josh Jobe is, and play designers are going to try to push the ball his way because he doesn't have the traits, he doesn't have the production, like all of it. He's scrappy, he hung in there for what he could do last year, and they like him for that, but very, very limited player. Now, maybe Shaq Griffin takes that role, and that would be an upgrade. Shaq Griffin had to start for the Vikings last year, and he's more of a, adequate CB3, and I would like that. And if Nicky Manwari is good, I would say if Shaq Griffin takes the CB3 spot, then yeah, you would bump this DB coverage grade up as well. So there's some upside in the Shaq Griffin signing. Right now, it doesn't seem like he's starting, but that could absolutely change. He is getting up there in age, but he's got some size, some speed, and again, I probably like him better than Josh Jobe. If he's able to win that job, that would be a good sign for this secondary. You do have Nehemiah Pritchett, who I did like coming out. Really rough rookie season. Not quite ready to give up on him, but tall, lengthy. Reminded me of Emmanuel Forbes coming out. Pritchett goes in the 5th round, whereas Forbes went in the 1st round. But some of those off-zone playmaking instincts were in there. We'll see if he can do anything in year 2. I'm not going to rule out that he could get in the mix for that CB3 spot. Demarion Williams comes over from Baltimore. Not sure if he'll make the team. You got Shamar Jean-Charles competing for a spot there too. And then Zy Alexander had some fans in the draft, some decent tape at LSU, but really no traits to speak of. If nothing else, he is Josh Jobe-esque coming out of the SEC there. And then as far as your safety depth is concerned, Jarek Reed would probably be your sort of former slot corner, deep safety backup type there to like a Julian Love or Kobe Bryant. DeAnthony Bell, I don't think the opportunities are going to be there because they're gonna really push to see what they have in Eman Worry, but he had some flashes out in Cleveland as a big-bodied kind of quasi linebacker for them, so he would technically fill that big safety role as well if anything were to happen to Nick Eman Worry. And if that were to happen, I would be curious to see how he does in that specific scheme fit. AJ Finley made some plays in college at Ole Miss. Ty Okada got some snaps last year, but really not the best safety depth after your top 3. But definitely an exciting secondary. I think, needless to say, the best part of this defense was a big part of Mike Macdonald's ability to get this defense to be top 10, or at least close to top 10 last year, and could be a unit that helps them take that next step as well. Especially in the case of Nicky Manwari and what dropping those physical traits into this role in this scheme could potentially do. It's, kind of like what we saw, the impact Kyle Hamilton could have for that Ravens defense. It's obviously a high bar to get to, but the same kind of idea in what they're going for there. And what that presence in the sort of short to intermediate alley of the offense is what they call that kind of area that defender plays, the impact that player can have in that space that obviously a lot of modern offenses are trying to attack. But that rounds out your total defense. They kind of pick up the season where they left off, like right there at that kind of borderline top 10 range. And I think that makes total sense, right? Like, we know this is a really high floor defense and really just a good defense overall, but can they take that next step? And it's not like they made massive additions either. Obviously, the Eman Worry addition is very fascinating. But it's more about the unit, I think, rounding out together underneath Mike McDonald's coaching, that everything could get lifted up just a little bit more. And then, yeah, you would be talking about a top 5 defense and a defense that would help this team transcend our 22nd overall power ranking. You get a top 5 defense, which this team is capable of, get a few things to go right offensively. Yeah, you're more of a, 20th ranked offense. Is that possible? Yeah, I think so. 20th ranked offense, fifth on defense. Yeah, that can absolutely be a playoff team, especially in the NFC. This team's really not that far out of the picture here. They just need a few more things to go in the right direction. One of those things that is pretty damn well established here, though, is the special teams. I mean, this is a tremendous unit. John Harbaugh's son, Jay Harbaugh, has done a great job overnight with this special teams. Last year, they ranked 6th per PFF for their team grade. DVOA had them 10th. They have a great kicker in Jason Myers, ranks 5th. Their punter, Michael Dixon, grades out as the 2nd best punter in the league. The returner is lacking. They rank near the bottom for the returner. They're still sorting through trying to find that guy. They signed Steven Sims. Probably not the answer there. But overall, the special teams has been really impressive with Jay Harbaugh continuing that legacy coming over. But I do want to just recap these strengths, weaknesses, and most importantly, those big pivotal factors that can swing the ultimate success of this team's season. This is a team, looking back on it, that really doesn't have a lot of like high-end strengths, but also avoids having too many big weaknesses as well. One of those balanced teams. But for strengths, I did have defensive coaching. The secondary is definitely a strength, and then special teams. But again, from a roster perspective, there's only one unit that's like a real strength. And then for weaknesses, there's only one unit at large that is a weakness. That's the offensive line. There is some upside there, as we'll see. They're in the wild card factors. But there are some depth questions, like wide receiver depth, plus that kind of like weird lack of an X wide receiver. There's some weirdness with the wide receiver room that a lot of teams don't, I think, deal with. And then the linebacker depth, like there is nobody there that can step in. If you had an injury there, that can be solved off the street in free agency, but still worth noting. But they do have some wild cards that can go one way or another, really. I mean, Sam Darnold is the ultimate wild card for this team. Yes, and a positive sign if he can be more like what he was in the first 15 weeks of last season for the Vikings. This offense should be better than we're projecting, but I do think, like I've said, there's a downside for him to be worse than the 20th ranked quarterback as well. So he's the ultimate wild card, but I think that goes hand in hand, too, with how this offensive line plays. If development doesn't hit on the offensive line, this unit is going to struggle. And then you can factor in the health at right tackle as well. On top of that, there is a pretty bad floor with this offensive line, even if there's a ceiling that this can finally start getting headed in the right direction. But those two things really go hand in hand and are going to ultimately determine the success of the offense, especially with Sam Darnold's, how he struggled against pressure last year late. And then on the defense, I mean, Byron Murphy in year 2, his floor isn't going to destroy this defense, but his upside could certainly make that defensive line more of a strength if he can emerge as something closer to a number 1 defensive lineman. And then Nick Eman, he does actually have a wider range of outcomes. He could struggle early just because I don't think he was that high floor of a prospect coming out. I certainly don't believe that. But in that system, something could click, and he could be more of an impact player and a slam dunk draft pick as well. I'm good enough admitting that the upside with that pick is there, even if I was lower on him as a prospect. So a couple of key young pieces for this defense to hopefully take that leap up from really good defense to great defense. But let's finish up by taking a look at this Seahawks schedule. So they do have an over-under of 7.5 wins, which is right in line with our last few teams. They are, however, 17th in Super Bowl odds. So I think this, Vegas does see a good bit of upside there. That is obviously higher than I've got them, kind of ranking 22nd. If Super Bowl odds are the Vegas power rankings, I'm a little bit lower on them in that sense. But they are still 4th in division odds at plus 550. So some of the odds are in line with my rankings. Some of them are a little bit higher. But either way, you look at their schedule, and it's a balanced schedule. Their division's tough for sure. NFC West is just a very balanced division. This is the first team we've ranked in that division. So you're going to have 6 tough games there. They do play the NFC South and the AFC South. That I would say is favorable, but a lot of teams that could very well be heading in the direction in both of those divisions. Really outside of week 3 getting New Orleans there, I'm not ready to say any of those games are cakewalks for Seattle. Ultimately, it's probably a slightly favorable schedule for Seattle. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to their own growth and development as a football team, whether or not they go over or under 7.5 wins, whether they compete for this division and beyond. The math for me came right out with where Vegas has it. 7.5 wins for this Seahawks team makes a lot of sense to me. I do think their floor is really nice with that defense, but a lot of risk involved with how much help they're going to get from the other side of the ball. And as well as, can they be a dominant defense that consistently wins games for this team either? Probably all combines for me to say there's not a ton of value in the 7.5 there, but this is going to be a very fun team to watch this season, in my opinion. And I would love to hear from you guys. What do you think of this 22nd ranking? I know there are still a couple of teams out there with the Raiders and the Colts that it's driving a lot of you guys crazy that I do believe in the floor of some of those teams there. So do you think I'm nuts for putting the Seahawks below them for a week 1 power rankings here? Or did this video maybe sway you a little bit that this team does have a few more questions than you might have thought beforehand? I just would love to hear from you guys in the comments down below. And who do you think comes next in these rankings? Is it going to be one of those teams, the Colts or the Raiders, or are we going to keep surprising with those teams climbing? Thank you so much for watching. Please do hit that like button on the way out as well. It really helps me out. And I will see you guys in a few days for the reveal of our next team in this series. We'll see you then. Peace out.